Chapter 341, The Magnificent Thousand Stone Caves Palace, Second Update. Princess Lucian was gentle and gracious, and Princess Galadriel was lively and radiant. Side by side, they created the most stunning sight in the elven city. Every passerby bowed in deep respect, and many of the young male elves gazed after them in admiration. As for Lucian, the human walking behind the two princesses, the gray elves barely spared him a glance. They regarded humans no more highly than stray cats or dogs by the roadside. The trio entered the soaring walls of the elven metropolis, crossed its long wooden thoroughfare, and finally stood before the Thousand Stone Caves Palace, a breathtaking dwarven stronghold fashioned for the gray elf kingdom. Lucian stepped forward and spoke to a guard posted at the palace gates. "Where is my father now?" he asked. The guard saluted crisply. "He awaits you in the grand hall. 22 nobles have already assembled to pay their respects." In the elven realm of Middle-earth, the king held the highest rank but did not rule with unchecked authority. Instead, he reigned as primus inter pares, first among many nobles, each wielding considerable influence in the kingdom. Lucian remembered well the old rule of the realm. If every noble opposed the king's decree, it could never take effect. So when Madros, eldest son of Fëanor, heard that Beren and Luthien had at last won a Silmaril from Morgoth himself, it felt like a spark in the darkness. Hope for a renewed assault on Angband flared in his breast. Drawn by that flame, Madros summoned his brothers and the other sons of Fëanor. He reached out to Fingon, High King of the Noldor, and even to allied men and dwarves. Their banners would march together anew against Morgoth's fortress. But not everyone shared his zeal. Thingol, still incensed by the earlier attempt of two of Fëanor's house to seize Luthien, flatly refused to join. In Nargothrond, too, Madros's reputation suffered. The same two sons of Fëanor had defrauded that city when Fingon ruled there, and its noble elves would not lend their strength to him again. Under that united opposition, Fingon's court council declared they could not commit the full might of the Noldor. Bound by tradition, Fingon was left with only his personal guard to throw in Maedhros's cause. Together, Maedhros's kin, Fingon's loyal warriors, a handful of men and dwarves, they advanced on Angband. Their courage was undeniable, but their numbers were too few. The hosts of Morgoth rose in terrible array under the banner of the Balrog king, Gothmog. Two great Balrogs hurled themselves into the fight, and the allied lines shattered. Fingon, sword in hand, held the center with heroic stubbornness. For every foe he felled, two more seemed to surface. At last, spent of strength and surrounded, he fell to Gothmog's whip of flame. Under that grievous blow, the last hope of the Noldor died on the field, and with it, the dream of reclaiming the Silmarils by force. The battered alliance scattered, and the darkness of Morgoth's dominion closed once more across Middle-earth. In the Grey Elf Kingdom, nothing could spark a declaration of war without two things: the king's consent and the support of at least half the elf nobles. Now that all 22 great houses were gathered before him, the timing was ripe. One of the royal guards muttered under his breath, "All of them together. Must mean trouble. Bet they've come to ask you to marry off their worthless sons again." Galadriel only laughed softly. War was the last thing on her mind. This realm had known peace for centuries. The only conceivable reason to summon every noble family at once was to press King Thingol for Luthien's hand in marriage, and it wasn't the first time. Luthien was famed as the fairest elf in all the lands. Every bachelor worth his silver dreamed of winning her. More than that, as Thingol's only child, her husband would inherit the throne. To the family whose son she chose, the future king, power and prestige would swell beyond measure. But Thingol's pride was as ancient as his line. A grandson of Fëanor himself, he looked down upon the lesser houses with scorn. Not one of their scrawny heirs, he believed, could ever match the grace and beauty of his daughter, let alone deserve her hand. Every time, the nobles returned empty-handed. Although countless suitors had come to court Princess Galadriel, King Thingol refused to decide her future for her, and Galadriel herself insisted that any husband be her equal or superior. One after another, the young lords who challenged her were soundly beaten and sent home licking their bruised pride. The only exception was her cousin Celeborn, a gentle scholar who preferred books to swords. Celeborn's grandfather, Elmo, was the youngest of 3 brothers. His elder siblings were Thingol and Alway, making Celeborn Galadriel's first cousin. "My father will never force me to wed one of them," Galadriel laughed, brushing a lock of golden hair from her face. "Come on, Luthien. Lucian and I will show you the palace." Luthien smiled, shook her head at Galadriel's confidence, and led the way across the polished stone bridge into the famed palace of 1,000 grottos. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Lucian murmured, eyes widening as they stepped inside. They found themselves in vast underground halls hewn from living rock. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, illuminated by strands of night pearls that glowed like captured starlight. Along the walls, veins of emerald and sapphire glinted where master craftsmen had inlaid them into the stone, casting a soft, enchanted light that danced across private chambers and secret alcoves alike. Long before Morgoth's fall, and long before the Noldor set foot on Middle-earth, the Grey Elves held sway over the lands. Their courts glittered with jewels and ancient treasures, and the greatest riches of the continent were gathered within their halls. Only later, when the dwarves finally seized their mountain keep, did that wealth slip away, spirited off into underground vaults. It was their ancestors' labors, after all, that made the dwarven realm of the Third Age so famed for splendor. Now under the guiding hand of Princess Luthien, Lucian and his companions stood before the vast entrance to the 1,000-stone caves. Torchlight danced across walls hewn from white marble, revealing pillars carved with scenes of animals, trees, and waves of starlight. At the far end rose the main hall, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, its floors of polished obsidian almost black as night. Stepping forward, they beheld the throne, a single seat hewn from gleaming ivory stone and inlaid with veins of gold. Upon it sat a figure of such grace and power that Lucian's breath caught. The elf king was taller by half a head than any gray elf Lucian had ever seen. His hair fell in a shimmering veil of silver, and upon his brow rested a circlet of beaten gold set with rubies and sparkling crystal. His features were perfect, high cheekbones, straight nose, and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. Lucian remembered the old tales. This was one of the 3 elf kings whom Orome himself had invited to witness the 2 trees in Valinor, the only gray elf ever touched by the tree's sacred radiance, and the sole elf to wed a Maya. Now, in all of Middle-earth, none bore greater honor. At the sight of Luthien stepping into the hall, the king's stern dignity softened. A kindly smile, the warmth of a father's pride, spread across his face. Lucian bowed his head in reverence as Luthien approached. In that quiet, vaulted chamber, the weight of centuries and the promise of what was yet to come seemed to hang in the air, uniting past and future beneath the silent gaze of the silver-haired king. King Thingol reclined on his throne, the banners of Doriath fluttering like pale wings behind him. At his feet stood Luthien, radiant as a pearl. With a graceful curtsy she proclaimed, "Father, I have returned. This is Lucian, the human hero brought to us by Lady Galadriel. He has already shown great wisdom. I beg you to hear what he has to say." From the opposite side of the dais, Galadriel descended the steps and took her place beside Thingol, her silver-gold robes whispering against the stone floor. The king regarded them both with gentle amusement. "I recall your plea, my daughter," he said, voice low and firm. "My nephew Finrod spoke much the same, and I made my position clear, yet he would not yield." He turned his keen gaze to Lucian. "Still, since Luthien holds you in such regard, and all our lords and heirs are assembled, I will grant you this audience." Never before had a mortal been permitted such honor in the halls of stone. 22 noble lords of the Grey Elves of Doriath, and their eager heirs standing behind them, all fixed their eyes on Lucian. In that hushed moment, the fate of 2 peoples seemed to rest on his words. Some watched with curiosity, others admired Lucian, and still others found themselves envious at the sight of the 2 most beautiful elven princesses, Luthien and Galadriel, speaking up on behalf of a mere human. Chapter 342, Humans Are More Powerful Than You Can Imagine, Part 3. Lucian stood before King Thingol's throne, his posture respectful but unwavering. He inclined his head in a deep bow, then lifted his gaze with a polite smile. "Your Majesty, I come as envoy of Prince Finrod and of mankind. There are 2 matters I wish to place before you. First, I have founded an academy in the elf city of Dorthonion, an institution where humans, elves, and dwarves might share knowledge and strengthen one another. Second, I request aid from Menegroth's armies. Send troops to bolster the defense line at Angband and help us repel the Balrog King's forces. King Thingol leaned back upon his carved ivory throne, eyes alight with amused incredulity. He exchanged a glance with the lord standing beside him before turning back to Lucian. "My human," he said, voice cool but not unkind. "My nephews Angrod and Egnor have already presented these very requests, and I gave them my answer. There is nothing more to discuss." He paused, then added, "Nevertheless, since you are Finrod's envoy, I grant you leave to remain in Menegroth for a time, and to take some elven jewels as your parting gift." Lucian's calm smile did not falter, though a flicker of surprise passed through his eyes. The idea that his proposals had been dismissed so swiftly stung, yet he would not show it. "Your generosity honors me, your majesty," he replied, inclining his head again. "Still, I must ask that you reconsider both the academy and reinforcements. The threat posed by the Balrog King grows each day. United, our peoples stand a far better chance of victory." Thingol's lips curved into a half-smile. "A mere human, daring to lecture the King of Doriath on strategy." He shook his head. "Do you truly believe men and elves can be equals in council? Be grateful, you may enjoy our hospitality, and bear away token jewels of our craftsmanship." Lucian blinked, then stood fully upright. "I am grateful, sire, but I will not give up hope. If Menegroth refuses its help, we may all suffer the consequences when Angband's host returns. I only wish to prevent that day." A hush fell across the throne room. Thingol studied Lucian for a long moment, his emerald eyes inscrutable. Then, at last, he spoke. "Very well, envoy of Finrod," he said, voice low. "Spend a fortnight in my halls. Learn what you can of my realm. If by then you have convinced none but yourself that your proposals hold merit, you will leave Menegroth quietly, and take only the jewels I see fit to give." Lucian inclined his head once more. "I accept your terms, your majesty." With a flick of the king's hand, two courtiers stepped forward and guided Lucian from the hall. As the doors closed behind him, Lucian allowed himself a steadying breath. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he would use every moment of his stay to sway Thingol's judgment, for the fate of countless lives depended on it. Lucian paused beneath the vaulted arches of the elven throne room, his dark eyes sweeping over the gathering court. "It's an honor to stand beneath these rafters," he said, bowing his head. A sharp laugh rang out. One of the royal heirs, Allison, tall and proud, stepped forward. He drew himself up to full height, leveled a contemptuous stare at Lucian, and sneered. "Honor, you say? Who appointed you guest of this palace? Keep your tongue in check, human, or by the time you leave, I'll have knocked out your other front tooth." Murmurs rippled through the assembled elves. Before Lucian could reply, a ripple of white silk drew their attention to Galadriel. She moved with all the grace of her name, slender, pale, and utterly unafraid. Flicking out a pale hand, she closed the distance to Allison in 2 strides, her gaze as cool as starlight. "Is that any way to address my guest?" she asked, tone so polite it belied the threat behind it. Beneath those silken sleeves, her fist clenched white and perfect. Allison's bravado faltered. He took a half-step back, glancing nervously at his father stationed a little way off. "Galadriel, he began, but his voice quavered. He swallowed, struggling to reclaim his haughty air. "I was only reminding him of his place. It's not you I fear, since you're a lady elf, but him." "You forget," Galadriel said, lips curving in a faint smile, "that a blade does not choose its wielder by gender." She paused, leaning forward. "When I first arrived at the court, you and the other heirs competed for my hand. You thought yourself strong enough. And yet, by the end of our sparring, you'd lost a tooth and both your arms were dislocated." A hush fell. Allison's face drained of color as the memory and the scorn took shape. Lucian met Galadriel's steady gaze and inclined his head in thanks. Allison swallowed hard, his threat evaporated. Far from knocking out Lucian's teeth, he of all people now feared the consequences of crossing the Lady Elf. With that, the tension in the hall eased, but every eye remained fixed on the newcomer human who, with quiet dignity, stood his ground under Elvenkind's ancient arches. Lucian stood before the silver-gleaming council hall of the Grey Elves, his posture unyielding. Around him, elven nobles murmured among themselves, their pale eyes reflecting candlelight. At his side, Allison shifted her weight, uncertain how the gray elves would receive their proposal. "He is merely a human," one of the elder elves finally said, voice cool as starlight. "And he claims he wishes to trade knowledge with us. Does he deserve such an opportunity?" Lucian met the speaker's gaze without flinching. "He does," he replied calmly. "His name is Lucian, and I vouch for his honor." He paused as a ripple of surprise passed through the assembly. "We, Prince Fingolfin of the Noldor and Lord Finrod of the Men, seek a partnership of equals. We do not come to beg favors, nor to grovel before Thingol or these noble houses. We come to offer our strength and insight in return for yours." A tall gray elf with hair like molten silver stepped forward. "Is this Allison?" he asked, lifting an eyebrow. "Have you heard of the Snaga in the caverns below Angband?" Allison's brows knitted. "Snaga? A half-orc? I'm not familiar." Lucian's lips curved into a faint smile. "Allow me." He turned slightly so the entire council could see. Snugger is one of those half-orcs, small, ill-suited for combat, who toil in the dungeon depths. They carry torches, haul earth and refuse, and deliver rations to the prisoners locked in Morgoth's cells. One day, a Snagar was sent to supply food to a solitary captive, an elf of the Noldor, bound in chains. He paused, letting the image settle among the nobles. Instead of scorn, the half-orc saw a glimmer of nobility in that elf's eyes. Against his orders, he lingered at the bars, spoke quietly, and offered scraps of bread. Over time, the two formed a silent alliance. The Noldor elf, imprisoned for defying Morgoth, trusted this unlikely friend with secrets, whispered plans of Angband's defenses, riddles of the enemy's forges, and clues to Morgoth's ultimate designs. In the hush that followed, Allison found her voice. It was through that bond, born of mutual respect, not fear, that we gained the most vital intelligence of this war. The chamber remained silent as the gray elves exchanged looks. Lucian leaned forward, pressing his case. Humility alone wins no wars. Allies fight together because they see honor and strength in each other. We offer you our swords and our knowledge. In return, we ask only for your aid in freeing Middle-earth from Morgoth's shadow. For a long moment, only the soft drip of water from the cavern beyond could be heard. Then the council's presiding lady inclined her head, her expression inscrutable. Lucian held his breath, knowing that in this echoing hall, the fate of their alliance, and perhaps the war itself, hung in the balance. Lucian strutted before the gathered Noldor, chest out and chin high. "You think your caverns are impressive?" he taunted. "Where I come from, my master feeds me so well I could eat myself 7/10 full every single day, without ever feeling the lash." The elves exchanged amused glances. When a tall Noldoran noble finally spoke, his voice was cool with disdain. "You boast of this cave and Angband as if they were the world," he said. "But beyond those stone walls lies all of Middle-earth. Vast forests, rolling plains, towering mountains. And even that is nothing compared to Valinor, the undying lands, where we dwell in light and laughter, feasting on fruits of gold and never knowing want." A silence fell as the elf painted his vision of silver cities and sunlit halls. Lucian's bravado faltered. His eyes widened with the sudden awareness of how small and sheltered his life had been. "You humans," the noble sighed, amusement softening his scorn, "always so eager to cast your nets where there is nothing to catch. Truly, you are an entertaining creature." From her seat upon the dais, Princess Alasiel, her eyes bright with humor, leaned forward. She recognized Lucian's deflated pride and couldn't help but let a laugh slip free. At that moment, Allison, his face flushed crimson, drew her slender elven sword with a sharp ring and tossed it at Lucian's feet. "Human," she cried, "I challenge you to single combat." High on the throne, King Thingol gazed down with cool regard. "Will you accept Allison's challenge, human?" he asked. "If you refuse, I will take your earlier boasts for the coward's nonsense they truly were." The gray elf king's lips curled in contempt. "We have no place here for a cowardly human. Be gone." Lucian met the king's gaze evenly. Moments earlier, he'd spun a tale that on the surface appeared to mock Allison, but in truth it cast a withering light on the entire gray elf kingdom, king included. No wonder the monarch seethed with anger, itching to see Lucian humiliated, slapped by Allison, then chased out of the forest forever. A faint smile curved Lucian's lips. "Very well, just don't assume humans are weak. You've no idea what we're capable of." He strode forward, and gave the elf's longsword lying in the dirt a light kick. To everyone's astonishment, the blade flew through the air and slipped home into Allison's scabbard with a quiet swish. Frowns creased every noble brow. This display wasn't the work of a master swordsman. Lucian had no training in precision footwork. His secret lay in raw, superhuman strength and an uncanny ability to manipulate metal itself. In his hands, or rather at the tip of his boot, one powerful impulse was enough to outmatch 10 trained warriors. The king's eyes narrowed. He had hoped to see the human crumble. Instead, he'd witnessed something far more unsettling. Proof that one mortal stood leagues above even the finest elves. Lucian's mastery over his blade had grown so uncanny that sheathing it was almost an afterthought. He could just as easily cleave a man's head clean off from leagues away if he chose. Now, in the vast marble hall, he and Allison stood opposite one another, watching 2 golden-armored elf guards wheel in a massive weapons rack. Upon its gleaming tiers rested every kind of elven armament, swords honed to a razor's edge, spears balanced like feathers, longbows strung with silken cord, quivers full of fletched arrows, and stout hand-axes glinting in the torchlight. "All right, human," Allison called, voice ringing out in the hush. "I have no need of the Sword of the Rising Sun for this contest. Let us each select weapons of equal caliber from this rack and fight a fair duel." He shrugged off the superior elven blade he'd been holding, one that outclassed every weapon on display, and reached instead for a lighter elven longsword and a matching recurved bow. Though the Grey Elves lacked the direct blessing of the twin sacred trees and were in pure strength no match for the Noldor, their years under the emerald canopy of Doriath and the ever-present grace of Melian had turned them into unparalleled archers. Indeed, any Grey Elf born beneath her protection was still far more formidable than the wavering tribes of green elves in the eastern wilds, whose ancestors had never once set foot in Melian's realm. With weapons chosen, Allison and Lucian took their places. The air between them crackled with anticipation. One swift spark, and the duel would begin. Lucian studied the towering golem before him. It was clearly far stronger than any human could hope to be. He let out a light laugh. "I'm a mage. I don't need weapons. Do as you please." He offered Allison a disarming smile. Her words might have sounded harsh, but Lucian knew she meant no real harm. In fact, he planned to return the favor soon, letting her save face in the next exchange, just as she'd allowed him to keep his pride intact now. Chapter 343. Magic, show it. "Magic can stand against us elves?" Allison's laugh cut through the air like a blade, equal parts anger and disbelief. The Grey Elves drew their power from Melian. Though she was one of the Maiar, she shared her origin with Yavanna, the great Vala of plants. Long ago in Valinor, Melian served under the flower goddess Vana, and the rest-giving Este, passing on her mastery of botanical, sonic, and hypnotic enchantments to her people. In every respect, the Grey Elves' magic rivaled, even surpassed, that of the Noldor. "Plant bundle," Allison intoned, thrusting a hand forward. Immediately, thick vines, each as fat as a gauntlet, erupted around his ankles and wound their way toward Lucian, eager to ensnare the human without the need for swords or arrows. The elf's eyes gleamed with the certainty that his plant magic alone would teach this insolent mortal a lesson. But Lucian didn't flinch. Standing firm, he drew in a steady breath. Then, from his open mouth, poured a torrent of flame, 3 brilliant colors coiling together in midair. The fire struck the vines, reducing them to ash in an instant. Smoldering fragments drifted to the ground, and where the green battle lines had formed, nothing remained but charred dust. With that, Lucian had answered the challenge. Magic had been shown and conquered. "All right, fire away. Your flames won't faze me," Allison jeered, his voice cool and confident. Before he could draw his bow, Lucian unleashed a roaring jet of fire. Tinge, who'd been lounging on the throne in idle amusement, shot upright, eyes alight. "Impressive," he murmured. "He really does have power." Allison's jaw tightened as he watched the inferno flicker and die away. Magic might be a convenient trick, but true skill lay in steel and arrows. With a swift motion, he slung his longbow from his back, knocked 5 gleaming, metal-tipped arrows, all impervious to flame, and drew the string to his ear. "Very well," he said, voice steady. "Now you'll see real precision." He fired in a single fluid motion, 1 arrow for each arm, 1 for each leg, and a final shot aimed between Lucian's legs to pin him to the ground. 5 arrows hissed through the air, each finding its mark in a deadly volley. Lucian's hands moved with preternatural speed and precision. One by one, his arrows shot past Allison's, overtaking them in mid-flight until finally they flew back toward their original shooter at deadly velocity. "Look at that, Allison. His archery's only gotten sharper," someone in the elven stands whispered in awe. Allison had just released a perfect 5-arrow volley. Any experienced scout knew that, on a true battlefield against orcs, such a strike would rack up 5 kills without breaking a sweat. His silver-green eyes narrowed as he watched Lucian's retaliation. "Arrows are fine and all," he muttered, "but let's see how you handle magic arrows." He swept his arm and traced a rune in the air. A blinding white magic circle blossomed before him. "Light magic! Rain of light!" Suddenly, a hail of luminous bolts cascaded toward Lucian, shattering his steel arrows in mid-air. But Lucian was already moving. He sidestepped the falling light arrows, knocked a fresh arrow, and loosed it in the same instant, though the real surprise was his next move. Another arcane symbol flared on the ground, and a second volley of radiant projectiles sprang forth, weaving around the shattered shards and racing back at Allison. Allison let out a sharp cry, leapt clear of the light barrage, and drew his slender elven sword in one fluid motion. He charged across the clearing, determination flashing in his eyes. Against Lucian's magic-enhanced speed, an archer's countershot would never suffice. To stand a chance, Allison knew he would have to close the distance and face Lucian blade to blade. Allison moved in a heartbeat, rushing to Lucian's side and unleashing elven swordsmanship honed over 1,000 years. Her blade danced with lethal precision, but Lucian didn't even flinch. "Careful," Luthien called from beside the throne. He'd assumed Lucian was caught off guard, but she was wrong. Just as Allison's sword neared him, a glowing sigil appeared beneath Lucian's feet. "Light magic. Field of light," he intoned. A shimmering dome of radiance blossomed around him, then exploded outward in a wave of brilliant energy. The impact struck Allison's elven sword so forcefully that it flew from her hand. Before she could recover, Lucian raised his right arm. "Giant magic! Giant arm!" His limbs swelled to colossal size in an instant, snatching Allison aloft. She struggled with all her might, but the enchanted grip held fast. Cradling her in one massive fist, Lucian turned calmly to King Tingle and the gathered elven nobles. "Those 2 spells, the Field of Light from Light Magic and the Giant Arm from Giant Magic, are the very disciplines I'm teaching at the Academy. I believe that with elven wisdom, if you come to our Academy to learn these magics, mastering them will not be difficult." At Lucian's words, King Thingol and the assembled nobles fell silent. The few spells he had just demonstrated were suffused with a brilliant radiance, the very power the Grey Elves lacked. It was the Noldor who carried such light. Bathed in the radiance of the 2 trees, they alone could turn back Morgoth's shadow. Yet if the Sindar could learn Lucian's human magic, they too might wield that luminous force and stand unafraid before the Dark Lord's armies. They remembered well the age of the 2 trees, when Morgoth, holder of all 3 Silmarils, sent his orcish legions to assail Doriath. Though Queen Melian wove her protective girdle around the kingdom, Morgoth's power pressed ever closer to their gates. To relieve his wife's burden, Thingol led repeated sallies against the invaders, clashing on Doriath's borders in a desperate effort to hold the line. Now, faced with the promise of a new kind of sorcery, the Grey Elves exchanged hopeful glances. A human from beyond the sea, offering them a path to light, perhaps the balance was finally shifting in their favor. The Orc Legion pressed in like a living wall, thick-skinned, heedless of death, and terrifying in their numbers. They fought with brutal ferocity. Had the Noldor not arrived from Middle-earth when they did, and Morgoth not withdrawn his host, it's doubtful the Grey Elf kingdom could have survived. Still, elven pride is a force unto itself. The very thought of taking magical instruction from humans, creatures they deem beneath them, left the Grey Elves visibly unsettled. Lucian watched their silence with a gleam in his eye. Hesitation, he knew, was the first sign of temptation. All they needed now was a final nudge. He stepped forward and spoke quietly, ensuring every elf in the court could hear. "Truth be told, I was holding back just now. That display, less than 1% of my true power." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. King Thingol and his counselors exchanged stunned looks. Lucian allowed the tension to build before he continued, voice calm and confident. Elves possess a natural affinity for magic far beyond human reach, yet even I, a mere human, can produce such effects. Imagine, then, what might be possible if I unleashed my full strength. In that charged silence, the walls of elven pride began to crack. Lucian's eyes met Thingol's with steady resolve. Elves live for countless ages and will only grow stronger at a given spell, the Grey Elven King reminded him from atop the throne. When we master the same magic, you'll be outmatched. Lucian inclined his head slightly. That may be, if I never advance, but what you just witnessed was less than 1% of my true power. Murmurs swept through the throne room. If Lucian's magic was so formidable, even at a fraction of his strength, what hope did they have against Morgoth's armies? Thingol rose, his silvery hair catching the torchlight. If you're so confident, then prove it. But not here. It's far too cramped. We'll move to the palace courtyard. At his signal, Lucian gently released Allison. His arm returned to its normal length, as though nothing had changed. Thingol swept aside the thick velvet drapes, revealing a balcony overlooking the vast marble courtyard beyond. Very well, the king declared. Demonstrate your power where we can witness it in full. As Lucian followed Thingol and the assembled nobles out into the night air, a hush fell over the Grey Elves. Pride they certainly possessed, but foolishness they did not. If even a tenfold increase in his magic could tip the balance, they would learn from him, and learn they would. Chapter 344, A Quiet Shock for the Elves, second update. Galadriel linked arms with Lucian as they walked out of the palace. Lucian, she said, her curiosity plain in her voice, I never imagined second and third brother were telling the truth. Where did you learn magic like that? Lucian gave her a casual shrug. It's hard to explain. A mysterious man taught me, though I really don't know who he is. Her brow furrowed. Lucian had unleashed astonishing power in the throne room, power beyond any human she'd ever seen. If he kept improving at this rate, she wouldn't stand a chance against him. Could your teacher have been Oroma Alderaan, the Vala of the Hunt? I've heard he sometimes walks Middle-earth. Lucian smiled wryly. It's possible, but I thought Oroma's talents lay more with beasts and forests than with brilliant light or giant-scale spells. Galadriel frowned in thought. True, his domain is tracking creatures and guiding the Valar's steeds, not summoning blinding radiance or moving mountains. They fell into a thoughtful silence, each pondering the source of Lucian's unexplained and undeniably formidable abilities. Could it be the work of other gods? Luthien mused, her brow knitting in thought. Lucian shrugged, a playful glint in his eye. That little story I told you about Snaga in the cave, did it strike you as true or just a fanciful tale? There are plenty more like it. Luthien's curiosity flickered to life. She cared little for magic or warfare, but this odd legend had captured her imagination. Are there really more stories like that? Where could I hear them? Lucian leaned back against the battered wood of the inn's doorframe. At my academy, of course. We swap folk tales every other night by the hearth. For instance, there's one about a Snaga who spent his days sitting in a cavern, gazing up at the sky. Luthien's eyes grew wide at the image. A Snaga trapped underground, staring at the heavens? He nodded. Yes, it goes like this. Once upon a time, a Snaga was laboring deep inside a cave when quite suddenly a bat dropped in. Only it wasn't a bat anymore, but a vampire. It landed with a thud and whispered hoarsely, I've flown 1,000 miles and I'm dying of thirst. Bring me some blood. The poor Snaga, who had never set foot beyond that tunnel, stared up at the gaping hole overhead and replied, That's ridiculous. The opening above is more than big enough. Why would you have flown all that way? Luthien laughed, picturing the exchange vividly. Even without castles or clashes, these peculiar legends filled her with wonder, and she could feel her heart leaning toward the Academy's fireside, eager for the next strange tale. The vampire's mocking laughter echoed off the cavern walls. You ignorant half-orc, he jeered. The sky is infinite, endless. How could you doubt it? Sanaga paused, a wry smile playing on her lips. I spend every day working down here, she replied evenly. If you look up, you can see the sky even from inside a cave. I know what I've seen. The vampire's eyes narrowed, his fangs gleaming in the torchlight. Fool, he spat. "One day you'll come with us when we march against the elves, and you'll learn just how big this world really is." Lucian, standing nearby, chuckled softly. "Your warning reminds me of the story you told in the palace," he remarked. "Both tales speak to the dangers of a narrow mind and the mistakes it brings." A bright silvery laugh escaped him, and at that sound, the assembled elven noble heirs, each hoping to win Princess Lucian's favor, froze in surprise. They had never seen their princess so thoroughly amused, and yet her laughter wasn't directed at them, but at one lone human. There was something undeniably extraordinary about him. Princess Lucian's eyes sparkled as she turned to Lucian. "Well said," she praised. "You're as clever as ever." Lucian grinned and gave her a jaunty thumbs up. Lucian smiled as he rephrased the old adage, one of a frog trapped in a well and a man peering up at the sky, to fit their world's customs. He wasn't trying to flirt with Lucian. He simply wanted to persuade her to visit his academy for a magical exchange. After all, Lucian, wielding Maya blood and the legacy of generations of elven kings, surpassed even Galadriel in power. Her enchantments could ensnare Morgoth himself, and she bore the true inheritance of Melian. Having her teach at the school would be a tremendous boon for both the students and for Lucian. Lucian regarded him thoughtfully, then raised a single thumb in an almost baby-like gesture. "Does this sign mean intelligence to you humans?" she asked. "Exactly," Lucian replied, nodding. She returned his smile and repeated the gesture. "Then you are quite clever. Humans are a most interesting race." At that moment, High King Turgon's cousin, King Thingol, who had been watching from a short distance, clenched his fists. "This fellow has no intention of courting my daughter," he muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing as he saw Lucian laughing softly beside Lucian. Lucian's father had made his stance crystal clear. If his precious daughter ever fell in love with a human, he would never allow it. Not even if that human were a celebrated hero brimming with powerful magic. Humans lived only for a few decades, while elves were effectively immortal. When a human died, his daughter would be left with a shattered heart. Elves too could perish, either by violence or by surrendering their will to live, in which case their souls departed for the halls of Mandos. But human souls, once freed from the body, did not linger under Mandos's care. They passed straight into the presence of Iluvatar. Even if an elf and a human died side by side, their spirits could never meet again in Mandos's halls. Fortunately, Lucian's brooding thoughts were cut short as they arrived before the Palace of the Thousand Grottos. Word of King Tinga's approach, accompanied by the high nobles of the elven court, spread quickly among the gray elves stationed outside. They gathered in eager clusters, curiosity shining in their eyes. "Lucian," King Tingi called out, no longer calling him human, but addressing him by name, "it's time to show us your magic." Lucian's display of power had already captured every eye, but nobody was prepared for what came next. "I'm going to cast the Colossal Transformation," Lucian announced, his voice echoing across the clearing. The intricate runes etched into his skin flared to life as his body began to expand. In mere seconds, he towered 100 meters tall. With a single, thunderous clap of his massive hands, he summoned gale-force winds that shredded the clouds overhead into wisps of vapor. The very earth trembled beneath his feet. No one dared imagine the devastation of a direct blow. Galadriel gasped and turned to her companions. "He's enormous, just like Tulkas the Valiant, the god of war who fought Morgoth himself. Could it be, did Tulkas teach Lucian this magic?" She recalled her grandfather's tales of the Valar's first assault on Morgoth, how Tulkas, in his immeasurable might, had struck the Dark Lord down and bound him with Engainor, the divine chain forged by Ale, before returning him to Valinor for judgment. If a mortal could mirror even a fraction of that power, the implications were staggering. King Thingol and the other elven lords stood frozen in awe. At last, Galadriel's voice rang out, urgent and determined. "We must send word to the Elders' Council immediately. If a human could master such formidable magic, surely the elves could learn it too." And yet, Lucian's transformation had revealed only a glimpse of his true capabilities, and left the assembled elves with questions more profound than they had ever imagined. Lucian stood at the edge of the blasted Valley of Death, its twisted black stones and withered trees testament to Morgoth's foul handiwork. He drew in a steadying breath, determination brightening his eyes. "I've heard that Morgoth's dark creatures were born right here in this valley," he announced, voice ringing out across the desolation. "But today, I will transform the Alley of Death into the Valley of Light." With those words, his figure swelled until he towered over the landscape like a living monument of hope. Folding his massive hands together, Lucian intoned the ancient words, "Light magic, fairy's law." Chapter 345, Becoming the Savior Once More, Part 3. Beyond Doriath's borders lay the dreaded Valley of Death. Lucian stood at its edge, chalk lines glowing beneath his feet. As he invoked the fairy law, a colossal magic circle blazed to life. In an instant, a brilliant pillar of light shot skyward, bathing the valley in pure radiance. All around him, the gray elves recoiled, shielding their eyes against the searing brilliance. When the light finally dimmed, they dared to look again. Lucian had shrunk back to his usual size, though his complexion was ashen from the effort. A low murmur rippled through the assembled elves. The spell had drained him, yet only temporarily. "That was my strongest light magic," Lucian said, voice firm despite his wariness. "Your Majesty, send a squad to sweep the valley. I've cleansed every shadow spawn Morgoth created down there." King Tinge recovered from his astonishment and bowed. "Excellent," he said. "No need for further proof. Your magic speaks for itself." Lucian managed a faint smile. He would have time to rest and to heal once they returned to Dothonian. For now, the Valley of Death was once again a place of light, thanks to its unlikely savior. Lucian sensed the last vestiges of shadow lift from the Valley of Death. No dark creature stirred now in the cleansed earth. Suddenly, countless petals drifted down around them, coalescing in mid-air into a radiant figure clad in flowing green. Her presence shone with unmistakable divinity. "Why have you gathered here?" she asked, her voice as gentle as it was commanding. The moment Tinge laid eyes on her, his usually guarded expression softened into pure adoration. He hurried forward and took her hand with reverent joy. Lucian, eyes bright with delight, ran to her mother and threw her arms around her in a childlike embrace. "Queen Mother, you have come." This was Melian, one of the mightiest Mar, wife of King Thingol, and mother to Lucian. After smoothing her daughter's hair, Melian turned to Lucian with serene curiosity. "Tell me, was it Varda Elentari, the great queen of the stars, who taught you your magic of light?" Among the Valar, Varda alone reigned supreme over the powers of illumination. As the spouse of Manwë, lord of the Valar, she would be the most likely to bestow such potent knowledge upon a mortal. Lucian met Melian's gaze calmly, his voice steady. "I do not know," he admitted. "My teacher has never revealed himself, or herself. I only know the magic came to me, but not from whom." Lucian's voice rang out clearly across the hall. "If the Grey Elves will send students to my academy for magical exchange, I will teach them the spell I just demonstrated, without holding anything back." Tinge hesitated, glancing from Lucian to Queen Melian. Melian had been silent, her face inscrutable. At last she met Lucian's gaze for 3 measured seconds, then turned to Tinge. "Tinge, this young man's proposal is sound," she said softly. "Give it your serious consideration." Ever since she wed King Thingol and devoted all her divine power to forging the Ring of Protection, Melian had never returned to Valinor. She knew nothing of Varda's recent deeds and could not confirm whether the Vala had indeed instructed this human in such potent light magic. Yet she could not imagine anyone but Varda imparting that brilliance, and the massive spell Lucian had just cast bore all the hallmarks of the ancient sorcery of Tokus. Had the Valar, moved by pity, secretly decided to aid elves and men against Morgoth? If so, this human, Lucian, might be the savior they had chosen. His suggestion was certainly worthy of the Grey Elf Kingdom's earnest deliberation. "All right, Lucian," Lord Tinge declared, bowing his head slightly. "I pledge to send our most elite company of Grey Elves to your academy, so they may exchange knowledge with humans, Noldoran elves, and dwarves alike." Lucian was about to thank him when his wife, Lady Melian, spoke the words that truly sealed the decision. Before Tinge could change his mind, Lucian continued breathlessly. "Foth, please, I want to lead that expedition myself." At that moment, their daughter Luthien stepped between them. "No," she said firmly. Tinge frowned, instinctively shielding his daughter. "Luthien, you know how treacherous the outside world is. Without your mother's and my protection, you would be exposed to dangers you cannot begin to imagine. Stay here. Our magic shields you. Not even Morgoth could harm you within these walls." "But father," Luthien protested, "I must see the world beyond our borders. Lucian has already cleared the Valley of Death. There's no longer any Dothonian threat along the way." She turned to her mother, her eyes wide with hope. Melian closed her eyes and reached out with her gift of foresight, her brow smoothing as she read her daughter's spirit. After a heartbeat, she opened her eyes and smiled at Tinge. "Let her go," Melian urged gently. "I feel her fate lies on that road, and it will lead to something far greater." Tinge exhaled and nodded. Lucian stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on his sister's shoulder. "Then I will accompany you, Luthien. Together we shall face whatever the world has in store." One of the elves rose, her voice ringing out through the council chamber. "My 3 brothers and I will go with Luthien, and Lucian will be at her side. I swear we will protect her with our lives." At her words, Galadriel stood as well, her silver hair catching the torchlight. King Tingle frowned, torn between paternal concern and the counsel of his wife. He would never lightly dismiss his daughter's welfare. If Luthien's mission to Dothonion was truly for the greater good, he could not bar her from it. Still, he paused, weighing the risks. Finally, he nodded. "Very well," he said, his voice steady. "You may lead the company, but be wary of honeyed words abroad and take especial care around certain humans." He leveled a pointed look at Lucian, who met his gaze with a helpless shrug. "Your Majesty," Lucian said, bowing respectfully, "that matter is settled. May we now address the second?" Tingle sighed and shook his head. "I am sorry, but I cannot dispatch royal troops. Even if I wished to, the nobles would never consent." His refusal carried a softer edge this time, and the assembled lords, clustered just beyond the throne, murmured their agreement, each shaking his head at the very thought of sending elven forces into foreign lands. Lucian stood quietly, absorbing the rebuff, even as the echo of footsteps and guarded whispers filled the great hall. Lucian surveyed the assembly of grey elf nobles with quiet intensity. They had faced Morgoth's armies before the First Age and bore the scars of that dreadful conflict. Now they basked in a peace so precious they refused to contemplate its end. "My lords," Lucian began, his voice steady, "you rely on the ring to shield your kingdom. But tell me, if that ring were ever lost, could you still hold back Morgoth's legions?" A ripple of protest ran through the chamber. "The queen guards the ring as she guards us," one noble declared. "How could it vanish so long as Melian stands?" Another shook his head in agreement, voices rising in defiance. Lucian met each gaze but said nothing further. He was waiting for the queen's response. Turning toward Melian, he pressed on. "Your Majesty, imagine the worst. The Noldor men and dwarves beyond our borders are overwhelmed by Morgoth. At last he leaves Angband in person, leading his orcs against the Grey Elf kingdom. In that hour, would the ring and your power be enough?" Melian's serene countenance turned grave. "Morgoth's strength dwarfs mine," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have held the orcs at bay only because he fears the wrath of the Valar should he break free of Angband. He dares not ride into battle himself." She paused, meeting Lucian's eyes. "If he ever casts aside that fear, the ring alone will not save us." A hush fell over the hall as the reality of her words sank in. Peace, they had learned, was a fragile gift, and it rested on a single, vulnerable ring. The Grey Elves, of course, are completely unaware of such matters. "I had things to take care of at home today, so I spent the entire night racing to finish the manuscript and sent it off early." Chapter 346, Lucian the Great Orator. "You see," Lucian called out, his voice amplified by a simple enchantment so that every elf in the hall could hear. "Even the Queen's girdle is not infallible. Have we already forgotten the horror when Morgoth's legions swept into Doriath and many kin were slain by the orcs?" He paused, letting the memory settle over the Grey Elves. Then he pressed on, more urgently. "Make no mistake, the girdle of Melian has kept Doriath safe, but it was not the only bulwark against darkness. Far more crucial was the great Angband line forged by the Noldor. That mighty barrier held Morgoth and his armies confined in the north, bringing peace to all of Middle-earth. But that line is broken now." Lucian stepped forward, his eyes bright with conviction. If the realm of Doriath declines to aid the Noldor and the free peoples today, then when Morgoth's host eventually crushes them, do you truly believe he will grant Doriath mercy? Do you imagine the Dark Lord will leave the girdle standing long after all others have fallen? A hush fell over the vaulted chamber. Lucian's words rang with stark truth, and the Grey Elves, no strangers to sorrow or wisdom, found themselves speechless. Elves may rival or exceed humans in intellect, having lived for centuries and learned much, but they are not immune to the hard lessons of history. Beside him, a few human envoys nodded grimly. They, too, had felt the weight of Morgoth's shadow. Now, all eyes turned to the Elf Queen, awaiting her verdict. Would the light of Doriath stand by its ancient allies, or would it waver in the face of this gathering storm? Lucian stood before the gathered elves, some as brilliant as students from the most prestigious academies, others from humbler halls, but all sharp enough to grasp the grand ideas he was about to lay out. They weren't ignorant of lofty principles, they simply hesitated to take the risks he would ask of them. Morgoth's aim is to conquer every corner of Middle-earth, he began. He'll spare no elf. You will either be slain or twisted into orcs and enslaved. As a man, I cannot bear such dishonor, and I know that no self-respecting elf could either. Elves, dwarves, and humans are bound together. When the whole is threatened, none of us can stand alone. We cannot ignore the peril on our doorstep simply because we feel safe for a moment. For 2 hours, Lucian wove together stories steeped in magic, quoted time-honored classics, and sketched the shifting alliances and stakes the Grey Elves faced. He provoked them with stark warnings, bolstered them with hopes of victory, even flattered their ancient pride, all to show that the real danger lay not in daring to act, but in failing to act. When he finally fell silent, he left them with 2 questions, riddles to seal his warning in their minds. What is born of anxiety yet perishes in ease? What egg shatters when its nest is overturned? The question of what threat lurks in times of peace, even on the calmest, rainiest day, hung heavy in the torchlit hall. Lucian stood before the assembled Grey Elves, his voice steady but urgent. We elves were born of heaven and earth, yet for ages we have endured under Morgoth's oppressive shadow. He began. Complacency is a greater danger than any open assault. Only by preparing now can we hope to survive whatever trials lie ahead. He paused and allowed the words to sink in. Over the past 2 hours, he had poured everything into his appeal. Parables about the perils of false security, clear-eyed analyses of elven history, and stark predictions of future crises. Even Melian the Maya, seated to his right, could hardly conceal her surprise at the breadth and depth of his argument. When Lucian finally fell silent, the hall grew still. For a long moment, not a single voice broke the hush. Then slowly, the elders began to exchange glances, understanding dawning in their pale eyes. Thingol rose from his seat, the torchlight glinting on his silver hair. He moved to stand beside Lucian, his expression one of profound respect. Lucian, he said, his voice resonant, you have shown us a wisdom beyond any mortal I have known. You've reminded us that peace, if unguarded, can be our undoing. Because of you, we see now the danger even in the rain's gentlest patter. He inclines his head in a respectful bow. Relief and pride warmed Lucian's chest. Convincing the Grey Elves to join his cause had been no small feat. Their support, be it council or troops, would prove invaluable. Though the House of Fëanor bears a grievous guilt, Thingol continued, the other elven kindreds, and indeed all free peoples of Middle-earth, are blameless in their struggle for freedom. Together, we will stand ready against whatever Morgoth may unleash. A ripple of agreement swelled through the hall. In that instant, Lucian knew his task was accomplished. The alliance was sealed, and with it, a new hope began to kindle in every elven heart. Lucian stepped forward, his voice ringing clear through the vaulted halls of Elvenhome. We Grey Elves can no longer shelter ourselves behind the Queen's ring. A hush fell as all eyes turned to King Thingol. Outside these walls, the Noldor elves were locked in desperate battle against the Balrog armies, and every moment of delay sapped hope from their cause. Lucian let his words hang a beat longer, then met the king's gaze. If we do not act now, the Noldor will fall, and the darkness will come crashing down upon us all. Thingol studied the 22 noble elders arrayed before him. This was no decision he could make alone. Lucian watched the Elder of Alagos stiffen in his seat, then rise. "I agree," the old elf declared. One by one, 13 more voices followed, softly at first, then with growing conviction. 5 remained silent, uncertain. 2 shook their heads in dissent. With a majority at last, Thingol's expression hardened into resolve. "Very well. From this moment, the Grey Elf Kingdom stands at war. Summon the Blue Mountain Dwarves to the 1,000-stone caves. They will supply us with arms and armor without delay." A ripple of agreement swept the hall. Lucian allowed himself a modest smile. 2 hours of pleading, and they had done it. Hope, at last, had found its voice. On reflection, Lucian's triumph was hardly surprising. First, he'd already proven his strength and won the respect of the Grey Elves, an indispensable foundation. After all, no one heeds the words of someone deemed weak. A pauper's tale of riches rings hollow, yet the richest man's offhand remark is prized as wisdom. Second, this age of Middle-earth remains comparatively simple, with few tangled intrigues or layered conspiracies that might deserve study by posterity. When the second and third princes rode to King Thingol's court, it was solely to extol Lucian's power, to champion mankind's might, and to recall their joint defeat of Morgoth's armies, ever hopeful that Thingol would commit troops against the Balrog host massing in the east. But to Thingol and his nobles, those speeches sounded like empty boasting, words without profit or purpose. How, they asked, could they possibly agree? It wasn't the fault of the second and third princes that they'd never faced this kind of challenge. They simply lacked the exposure. Lucian, however, was in a different position. The torrent of historical data and life experiences from his previous world had filled his mind with all manner of unusual knowledge. It didn't make him any stronger in battle, but it gave him a decisive edge when it came to tactics and strategy. He'd seen so many practical examples across countless eras. "Our academy has just welcomed a delegation of dwarves into our exchange program," Lucian explained. Right now, the Noldor elves are collaborating with their master smiths to design a new type of armor capable of withstanding extreme heat, exactly what we'll need against a Balrog. The Grey Elves have also signed on, lending their own expertise. When the time comes, that combination of dwarven metallurgy and elven enchantments will be invaluable. Thingol's face broke into a broad smile. Indeed, sending a Miss Ares to your academy has proven more than wise. With heat-resistant armor in development, orc-restraining light magics, giant strength enhancements, and the combined forces of elves, humans, and dwarves, the utter defeat of Morgoth and his orc legions no longer felt like a distant dream. Once Morgoth and his hordes of orcs are finally defeated, Melian will no longer need to strain at preserving the power of the ring. At last, the Grey Elves can emerge from their hidden havens, wander the wide world beyond, and taste the true peace they have longed for. Standing beside Lucian, one silver-haired elf watched him with gentle regret and whispered, "It's a pity you're not one of us." Chapter 347, Elf Dinner, Second Update. To King Thingol's discerning eye, Lucian was the very embodiment of excellence, brilliant in mind, formidable in strength, and unwavering in courage. If Lucian had been an elf, Thingol would have spared no effort in arranging him as a royal son-in-law, uniting him in marriage with his daughter, Luthien. After all, only someone of Lucian's caliber could hope to match her grace and power. Yet, alas, Lucian was human, and his years were destined to be few. Even the greatest of mortals would return to dust within a handful of decades. So in the privacy of his chambers, Thingol could do nothing but sigh at the unfairness of it all, wishing fervently that such an exceptional soul might have lived among the timeless elves. That very evening, the king hosted a lavish banquet within the glittering halls of the 1,000-stone caves to formally welcome Lucian into the Grey Elf Kingdom's circle of honored guests. From this night forward, he was no longer seen merely as a mortal man, but as a human wizard whose strength and wisdom had already illuminated the path for the elves, much as Gandalf the Grey would one day guide men and elves alike. Crystal chandeliers swayed overhead, casting rainbow prisms across mosaics of sapphire and ivory. Tables heaped with delicacies, honeyed pheasant, spiced quail, silver trout from the northern streams, lined the vaulted hall, each dish set upon platters of moonstone and mithril. Musicians played soft, haunting melodies on harps and flutes carved from elderwood, and the air shimmered with the quiet promise of alliance and friendship. As Lucian stepped beneath the arched doorway, every gaze in the hall turned to him. Thingol rose from his throne of carved pearl and jade, his pale hair glowing in the torchlight, and bowed gracefully. Tonight, no boundaries remained between elf and human. All were united in admiration of the man who had shown them a brighter future. Lucian stepped into the great hall and took in the scene with a sense of wonder. All around him sat noble elves, tall, graceful men and elegant, ethereal women whose beauty was as effortless as a moonlit glade. Every face seemed carved by master artisans, every posture as fluid as a breeze through silver leaves. It was a sight both exquisite and reassuring. Here, at last, he was among people who shared in the old world's magic. The banquet before him was equally enchanting. Long tables groaned under platters of jewel-toned fruits he had never seen, brilliant pomegranates that glowed like sunset, star-shaped berries that shimmered in the candlelight. There were delicate pastries dusted with powdered rose petals, bowls of honey sweetmeats that seemed to sing on his tongue. And, to his surprise, there was meat, tender roasts of mountain goat, rich stewed boar, and game birds glazed with aromatic herbs. Lucian had grown up watching films and reading tales that painted elves as strict vegetarians, living off fruits, grains, and the forest's bounty alone. Over the past weeks, however, he'd learned otherwise. Elves did hunt. They believed that all living things, be they animal, tree, or vine, shared the spark of life. It was not cruelty but acceptance. Animals and plants alike had life to give, so to partake in one was no greater sin than to partake in the other. And so he watched them carve succulent slices of boar with serene reverence, every bite an act of gratitude. Beyond the familiar delicacies, Lucian's eyes lit on something even more extraordinary. Plates of golden biscuits called lambas, each no larger than a coin, and crystalline vials of glowing miruo nectar. An elf beside him explained in quiet tones that a single lambas biscuit contained enough concentrated energy to sustain a traveler for days, while a draught of miruo nectar banished exhaustion and renewed every fiber of one's being. Lucian tasted one tiny biscuit and felt warmth and strength flood his limbs. A sip of miruo followed, and weariness dissolved as though it had never existed. He leaned back, a contented smile settling on his lip. Here, amid these ageless people and their enchanted fare, Lucian felt both a humbling awe and a promise of belonging. Tomorrow, the real lessons would begin. But for tonight, he was simply a guest at an elven feast, nourished in body, intrigued in mind, and more determined than ever to prove himself worthy of this wondrous world. The evening air was warm and the hall alive with laughter. No spoiled elf children dared cause a scene after witnessing his prowess. Truth be told, watching those handsome men and graceful women dancing and singing was a delight. But it was Lucian's voice that stole the show. Every note carried a subtle magic, mesmerizing the crowd and making them feel as if their ears were blossoming. If Lucian hadn't already been driven by loftier ambitions, he might have been tempted to propose on the spot, marry Lucian, and spend his days lost in song and dance. Lucian's confident charisma was undeniably attractive. It was simply a matter of bad timing. In so many tales, villains warn that a hero's strength shatters the moment he finds love and children, weaknesses they can exploit. Heroes counter that love and family give one purpose and courage beyond measure. Lucian, however, found himself siding with the cynics, especially given how extraordinary his own situation was. Lucian's power lay in the ability to seed clones of himself across countless worlds. When his heart remained untouched by attachment, discarding a single duplicate was no more consequential than turning a page in a book. Each reality continued on its own, unaffected. But once genuine ties formed, everything changed. If one of his counterparts, say the Lucian who'd settled here, married and had a child, what then? What if that Lucian fell, sword in hand, fighting Morgoth? Or perished in the titanic clash against the Valar and Iluvatar? That kind of loss was nothing like the easy comings and goings of friends in the Harry Potter universe, where classmates parted ways forever, but never really needed to look out for each other's survival. In the world of the magician's apprentice, Lucian had retreated into solitary forests and mountains, leaving new allies behind without a backward glance. His comrades in the fairy tale guild remained blissfully unaware, when he slipped away, and even less tethered were his brief partnerships in Academy City or the realm of the Magic card game. At best, they remembered him fondly. No bonds tested by life or death. Lucian vowed he would never marry or father a child until he'd mastered total freedom of passage among his clones' worlds. Only once he could enter and exit each reality at will, ensuring that no incarnation of himself would ever be stranded or sacrificed, would he allow himself to build a family worth protecting. Lucian had laid out a simple contingency. If danger ever threatened, he would whisk his wife, their children, and any other beloved kin away to safety in another realm before the worst could come to pass. The great hall was alive with music, and as the banquet reached its crescendo, the elves rose one by one to claim their dance partners. After politely declining invitation after invitation, Lucian, the princess of the Dancing Isles, finally glided across the marble floor and stopped before Lucian, who remained seated with a goblet in hand. "Please," she said, her warm eyes sparkling. "Won't you dance with me?" He hesitated. I'm not much of a dancer." His voice was steady but sincere. Without waiting for a reply, Lucian took his hand. "That's perfectly fine. Aside from my mother, I'm the best dancer in the kingdom. I'll teach you." And with that, she led him onto the dance floor. Lucian glanced back toward the throne just as Thingol rose, frowning. He was about to stand fully when Million, seated at his side, gently pressed his arm to hold him down. "Do not fret," she murmured. "He is no ordinary human. Intervening now may only complicate matters." Million's careful watch had already told her something unusual. The life force emanating from Lucian was astonishingly strong, far beyond that of any normal man. As Lucian guided him through the first graceful steps, even Thingol could not look away, curiosity overcoming his concern. King Thingol lay back against the cushioned bench and stared up at the canopy of silver leaves overhead. Queen Million's words still echoed in his mind. This stranger might be no ordinary elf, but a Maya walking in disguise. With a heavy sigh, he turned to his son, Lucian. "Lucian," he said quietly, "I'd like to ask your mother about magic. Do you think that would be too bold?" On the dance floor below, Lucian guided the young visitor, now known as Lucian, through the final steps of an elven dance. Lucian's movements, once stiff and awkward, had grown fluid under Lucian's patient instruction. Now, emboldened by each graceful turn, he dared to speak his mind. "One of the main reasons I came to Doriath," Lucian admitted, "is to learn from Queen Melian. We won't set out for Dorthonion for another week. This seems the perfect opportunity." Lucian dipped his partner in a final flourish. "You needn't hesitate. My mother is kind and wise. After tonight's feast, I'll bring you to her privately." Lucian considered the offer. "Perhaps tomorrow morning would be better. A late evening visit feels a bit improper. Though she is unchanged by time, she and I would be alone as dusk falls." Lucian smiled. "Very well. At first light, we'll go to the garden." The next dawn, Lucian followed Lucian and Lord Galadriel through the palace's marble colonnade into the royal gardens. There, the air was cool with dew and alive with the soft song of birds, and before the silken boughs stood Queen Melian, waiting to share her secret lore of elven enchantment. When Melian first arrived in Valinor, she took up residence not in the famed thousand-stone caves beneath the earth, but in a private haven shaped by her own hands, a secret grove fashioned in the likeness of the Garden of Lorien. Here, nestled within an uncharted woodland, she tended to rare blossoms and exotic flora, nurturing each petal and leaf with elven care. This hidden sanctuary remained beyond the reach of all but three: King Thingol, Luthien of Doriath, and Galadriel of Lothlorien, each granted free passage through its blooming arches and shaded pathways. In this secluded refuge, Melian preserved a fragment of Valinor's light, a whisper of the blessed realm flourishing in the heart of Middle-earth. Chapter 348, The Crisis Approaches, Third Update. Melian lounged on a smooth garden stone, her pale eyes following Lucian as he trailed after Luthien and Galadriel. Around her, nightingales flitted from branch to branch, their sweet songs flowing through the dusk air, melodies she herself had taught them. "I understand from Luthien that you wish to study magic under my guidance," Melian said, her voice as clear as the garden's bubbling fountain. Lucian halted and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, you are a Maya of Valinor. I would be honored to learn from you, so that when Morgoth mounts his counterattack, I may stand ready to meet him." Melian smiled gently and rose to her full height. The nightingales hushed, as if waiting for her words. Magic, to the elves, appears wondrous because they cannot fathom its source. But to me, it is as natural as breathing. From the moment I came into being, I have understood and wielded these powers instinctively. I never taught the elves magic itself. I only shared my insight into the forces at play. Through their own incantations and gestures, they transformed that understanding into the spells you know. She waved a hand toward the winding pathway where Lucian and Galadriel paused to look back at them. Most of what I conveyed has already been absorbed by those two. If you are serious about advancing your skills, speak with them directly. They will guide you in building upon what I have shown. With a graceful nod, Melian stepped back under the arching boughs, her presence melding once more with the garden's soft shadows. Lucian straightened, resolve shining in his eyes, and turned to follow Lucian and Galadriel, ready to begin his true lessons in magic. "If their knowledge isn't enough, you can always come back to me," Melian said gently. "I will share everything I know." Lucian nodded, absorbing her words. As Melian watched him, his mind worked in overdrive until the pieces fell neatly into place. The Valar and the Maiar were not mere spirits, but living extensions of Iluvatar's thought, each entrusted with a fundamental aspect of the world. Manwë, king of the Valar, reigned over air and wind, and all winged creatures. Varda held sway over light. Melkor once commanded the very essence of darkness. United, their powers comprised the laws that governed the entire universe. Mortals, elves and men alike, could not wield these laws directly. They lacked the innate clarity to perceive such pure forces. Instead, they learned to mimic fragments of divine power through complex rites and incantations, what the peoples of Middle-earth called magic. Melian's realm was that of living things. With a mere flicker of her will, she could draw countless vines from the earth, wrapping them around any foe who dared challenge her. Lucian stared in astonishment as a tangle of glossy green shoots shot up around a fallen tree stump, twisting in on itself. He realized then how vast and intricate the world truly was, and how much there still remained for him to learn. Lucian watched the gray elves struggle once more. Like Allison had yesterday, they couldn't simply bend the earth to their will. Instead, they had to channel spells through their bodies, coaxing thick vines from the ground to join the fray. In contrast, the god of force demonstrated true mastery over gravity itself. With a casual gesture, he sent apples tumbling from the air, controlling their descent with absolute precision. To the ordinary eye, it was pure miracle, but to one extraordinary human who stood by the god's side, it was an elegant lesson in mechanics. From that simple demonstration, the human extracted a series of mathematical formulas, the laws of force and motion distilled into equations. Using those principles, he went on to build machines capable of replicating the god's feats. Most people who witnessed the god's display could never grasp its secrets. Yet under the guidance of that remarkable human, artisans and engineers learned to apply the same formulas to their inventions. To them, magic and machinery were two sides of the press. Aim coin, one born of arcane power, the other of cold calculation, but ultimately inseparable. That pioneering human, known in the magic world as the founder of all modern sorcery, was also, among the elves, the very first to decipher and wield true magic. None shone brighter than Melian, his greatest disciple, and the standard by which all others measured themselves. Even the most gifted among them, elves like Lucian and Galadriel, had absorbed every lesson Melian taught. But despite their talent, neither had wholly internalized her wisdom, nor attained her level of mastery. And so Lucian waited, determined to bridge the gap between the mechanical brilliance of humans and the boundless magic of the gods. Lucian sighed as he thought of practitioners like Allison, who'd barely scratched the surface of their craft. In truth, the magic of every world runs on the same underlying principles. His own rapid mastery of lightning spells, for example, wasn't some miraculous talent. It was the direct result of encountering the very essence of lightning, thanks to Misaka Makoto's help. Once he'd felt that raw spark, every variant of thunder magic, and even the Taoist traditions built around it, fell into place with startling clarity. Still, Lucian reminded himself, contact isn't mastery. If he had truly mastered the essence of lightning, he wouldn't be merely a demigod. He'd stand among the full godfathers, able to snuff out a star with a thought. And if he absorbed the laws governing all the Valar and Maya of Middle-earth, he might well spawn a new universe of his own and reign over it at its apex. Middle-earth, he realized, harbored depths of power yet to be explored. Of course, there was one more point he couldn't ignore. Different worlds may differ in some of their fundamental laws, but those differences aren't vast. The underlying principles remain similar. By gathering the same type of magic from multiple realms, Lucian gains a unique advantage. He can pierce more deeply into the law's true essence. Take light magic, for example. It appears in fairy tale, in Harry Potter's universe, in the magic card world, and even in Middle-earth as Varda's domain. To attain godlike mastery of a single magic in one world is extraordinarily difficult. But by studying how that magic functions across several worlds, he can piece together insights far more readily. Over the next few days, Lucian remained in the company of Lucian and Galadriel. Lucian proved easy to befriend. Whenever Lucian spun her a few intriguing tales, she was happy to share every scrap of her knowledge and to demonstrate her spells. Her most potent talent is a hidden enchantment woven into her singing. It cannot be detected by any normal means. The moment her voice reaches your ears, its effects take hold, even if you've shut down all 5 senses. Lucian has experienced that power on more than one occasion. Even with all his psychic prowess and iron will, Lucian found it nearly impossible to resist Luthien's enchantment indefinitely. Her song wove itself into his mind, threatening to drag him under. Only by striking at her body and interrupting her music could he hope to crack the spell. Galadriel posed an entirely different challenge. The proud elven princess thrived on rivalry. She wouldn't honestly share her magic until she'd been beaten. Though her raw power didn't match Luthien's, the scope of her learning was vast. The ancient lore of Melian, the smithing secrets of Aule taught by the Noldor, and Varda's own mastery of light from the Light Elves. Yet all that knowledge lay scattered, still unrefined. Given time to integrate and harmonize her studies, Galadriel would become a formidable force. Just as the future Queen of the Elves proved when she resisted the ring's temptation and drove Sauron back by sheer strength of will. Lucian spent his days in the Grey Elf realm, calmly exchanging arcane secrets as he waited for his elf friends to return to Dorthoniel. Unbeknownst to him, his daring use of goblin lore to obliterate the dark legions lurking in the Valley of Death had not gone unnoticed. Far to the north, in the black depths of Angband, Morgoth had stirred at the news of this affront, and the shadow of impending peril was already creeping toward Lucian. Chapter 349, The Accidental Birth of the Ring, Update 1. In the shadow of the Angband Mountains, 3 colossal volcanoes rose 10,000 meters into the sky, forming a forbidding gateway to the dark fortress within. Ribbons of smoke curled from their summits, mingling with a noxious haze that clung to the air. Beneath this volcanic triad, an intricate network of caverns delved deep into the earth, where countless orcs of every breed toiled without rest. At the heart of those tunnels lay a magnificent palace hewn from black basalt. Its gates soared 1,000 meters high, and at their threshold slumbered Karkaroth, the demon wolf. Morgoth himself had chosen this cub from the darkest line of wolf demons, infusing it with his own corrupt power and a ravenous, devouring spirit. Day or night, the beast remained vigilant, unguarded by fear or fatigue, able to perceive even the most cunning disguise, and capable of unleashing devastation on any intruder. Within the palace's vast throne room, carved of obsidian and lit by flickering braziers, Morgoth, the once most powerful of the Valar and the source of all shadow, rose from his ebony throne. His armor of blackened steel absorbed the firelight, and his eyes glimmered like cold embers. A moment ago, a surge of radiant power had struck him from the direction of Death Valley. The force of that light spoke of a Maya, and it sent a ripple of alarm through Morgoth's dark heart. He narrowed his gaze and spoke into the silence, voice resonant as distant thunder. Such formidable light! Have the Valar abandoned Valinor and ventured here to challenge me? Silence answered him, heavy as doom. Yet in that hush, Morgoth knew the Age of Shadow faced an unprecedented threat. Lucian froze in his tracks, for a blinding light had descended so suddenly that, for a heartbeat, he believed Varda herself, the Queen of Stars, had arrived on Middle-earth. But Varda never strayed from Valinor, and if she did, Manwë, her lord and consort, would surely stand at her side. The only reason Manwë would ever set foot in Middle-earth again would be to marshal the Valar in a second decisive assault against him. 3 Silmarils in hand though he was, their radiance would be no match for a united host of gods. Besides, Varda's power would shine far more brilliantly, and neither she nor her kin would come now. He closed his eyes and reached out with all his senses, yet the mystery only deepened. In his wake lay the ruin of his own making. The Noldor, roused by his secret council, had slaughtered the Teleri and fled across the sea, severing their bonds with Valinor in a tide of elf blood. The distant Valar, aloof and inscrutable, would scarcely weep for the fate of the Noldor, and would be even less inclined to intervene while Lucian still held the upper hand. If the Valar intended to move against him, they would wait until their advantage was undeniable. He opened his eyes, staring into the silent horizon. Time and timing was the true battlefield. Each passing moment carried him farther from the certainty of the Valar's wrath, yet every second also edged him closer to the moment when they could strike unopposed. And in that precarious interval lay the slender thread on which all his designs balanced. If Morgoth could annihilate every elf, human, and dwarf on the continent before the gods could intervene, he would absorb the entire land into himself, and none, not even Ilúvatar, could stand against him. But should the gods strike first, his plan would collapse. Driven by that urgency, he was determined to unleash war and crush every shred of opposition before they had a chance to respond. "Sauron, come to me. I have a task." With nothing more than a thought, Morgoth summoned his lieutenant. Far off, on his healing island, Sauron lay recuperating. Moments later, in the form of a great vampire, he soared toward Morgoth's fortress. At the palace gate, he shed his monstrous guise, restored his true form, and knelt at his master's feet. "My lord, you called?" Morgoth studied him with a cold, inspecting gaze. "How are your wounds?" "Sire, I have recovered most of my strength," Sauron replied, head bowed. "I am ashamed to have been bested by elves and men." His crimson eyes flickered with hatred as he recalled the human who had wielded such uncanny magic. "They will pay for their insolence," he vowed. The fire demon host under King Gothmog burst through Maedhros' strongest defenses, and in the ensuing rout, the orc legions led by Sauron were scattered in panic. Sauron himself lay grievously wounded. Never before had he known such humiliation. Swearing under his breath, he vowed that one day he would sever that wizard's head and offer it as prey to the demon wolves on his island. "You can't fault me," he groaned to no one in particular. "Who'd have guessed a mere human could wield such power?" Morgoth said nothing harsh. Instead, he laid a firm hand on Sauron's shoulder. Morgoth's own formidable presence, and his talent for drawing the Maya to his banner, had always impressed even the mightiest among them. After all, it was only Morgoth who dared introduce discord into the music of the Ainur, openly defying Ilúvatar's design. "Master," Sauron rasped as he struggled to his feet, "rest assured, I will not fail you again." He paused, pressing a hand to his side where fresh blood stained his armor. "This wound, it's given me a new insight. If I can master it, my strength will grow far beyond what it is now." Morgoth's dark eyes gleamed. "Explain these ideas to me," he said. "Perhaps together we can sharpen them to their fullest edge." Among Morgoth's lieutenants, only 2 matched him in power, Sauron and the Fire Lord. The Fire Lord wielded the ultimate flame. Its capacity for destruction dwarfed even Sauron's raw might. Yet Sauron, a scholar among the Maiar, had walked in the halls of many Valar before Morgoth's fall, mastering nearly every branch of their lore. "I intend to forge a ring of power," Sauron announced. "I will pour all my knowledge into its metal and bind its strength to my own. With the ring upon my hand, my potency will more than double." Morgoth regarded him with a slow, approving nod. "The concept is sound, but it lacks crucial refinements. Allow me to assist you in its completion." He stretched forth a dark hand, and at his command a sliver of the rarest magical ore drifted in from beyond the palace gates. He breathed on it, and living fire crept over the metal's surface. As the flames danced, glyphs of power flowed into the ore, etching themselves in a luminous, ever-shifting script, as though the runes were eager to claim the metal for their own. As the molten metal cooled, it resolved itself into a slender ring bristling with strange ancient runes. Morgoth placed his palm over the band and poured a searing current of his own power into it. "There," he announced, "the ring now carries my strength. Wear it, and your power will be 3 times what it once was." Lucian knelt and bowed his head, awe and gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Master." Morgoth nodded as Lucian slid the ring onto his finger. Immediately, the air around him seemed to hum with newfound energy. Satisfied, Morgoth spoke again, his voice crisp with command. "Lucian, there's been an incident in the Valley of Death. I want you and your men to slip in under cover and discover who's been stripping away my power there." In truth, Morgoth had not labored over that ring purely to bolster Lucian's might. Its runes formed a two-way channel directly back to him, allowing Morgoth to spy on every step Lucian took. If the threat proved minor, all the better. But if it turned out the gods themselves were behind the disturbance, well, then Lucian would make an ideal fall guy. Morgoth could vanish before any divine retribution ever reached him. He fixed Lucian with a steady gaze. "Go now. Succeed or suffer the consequences." Lucian rose, the ring's power thrumming like a second heartbeat. With a final bow, he answered, "I will not fail you, Master." Lucian's voice rang out with steely resolve. "I will complete the task." Unbeknownst to Sauron, Morgoth harbored plans far beyond his comprehension. Yet, as he sensed his own power surging to 3 times its former might, a cruel smile twisted his lips. With renewed confidence, he withdrew to the island's shore, determined to gather his most formidable warriors for the march into the dreaded Valley of Death. Chapter 350, Sauron's A Second Update. Lucian, my son, you must be ever watchful beyond our borders. Should you face danger, return to Dorania at once. At the frontier of Doriath, King Thingol and Queen Melian spoke earnestly to their daughter, Luthien. 7 days had passed since Lucian's arrival in the Grey Elf realm, and after countless trials, the company bound for Dothonian was finally chosen and ready to depart. "Do not fret," Thingol reassured them. "Though Luthien shuns battle when she may, her skill is formidable indeed. She vows to return in 3 to 5 years. Of course, in elven reckoning, 3 to 5 years pass as swiftly as 3 to 5 days in human time. With a final embrace, Luthien mounted the great horned hart that served as her steed. She gave a curt nod to Galadriel, who stood beside her in gleaming elf plate armor. Drawing her slender sword, the lady led the assembled 200 elite gray elves in a clear command. To Dothonian, swift and unyielding. A horn sounded, and the convoy surged forward. The massive deer thundered ahead, guiding them once more toward the ominous pass of death. Elven riders favor great stags with sweeping antlers, though a few choose horses instead. Humans ride almost nothing but horses. Dwarves, too low to the ground for comfort, tend to prefer sure-footed goats or stout farm pigs. Half-orcs rarely mount any beast, and only the most elite among them claim wargs for steeds. Wargs, the fearsome descendants of demon wolves and hyenas, match or exceed a horse in size, and their ferocious nature and combat prowess are legendary. "I actually have a spell that can whisk you all straight to Dothonian," Lucian said as he surveyed the departing column. "No need for days of slow travel." He slipped from his saddle, and with a casual wave of his hand, pressed a small, rune-etched stone into the soft earth beneath an ancient oak just outside the ring's boundary. The others paused only briefly before Luthien gave the signal to move out. Lucian vaulted back into the saddle and fell in beside her. Within the ring's limits, everything was magically sealed off, teleportation spells fizzled, and even his own makeshift key wouldn't breach the barrier. But step past its invisible edge, and every enchantment sprang back to life. If Luthien and the Grey Elves agreed, Lucian could load their supplies into his little spacefold box, gallop beyond the ring, and instantly teleport the entire caravan to Dothonian. All it took was their consent, and a single incantation. I think they'd rather make this journey on their own. Like me, they're stepping out of Doriath for the first time and seeing the world beyond these woods. Luthien shook her head, a gentle smile playing on her lips as she glanced at the Grey Elves traveling with them. Their eyes sparkled with wonder at every sight, the dappled sunlight through leaves, the distant rise of rolling hills, even the simple stretch of open sky. Their realm, ringed by Melian's protective spell, had been a safe haven, but it was also a prison. Most Grey Elves, Lucian included, had never set foot beyond the enchanted boundary. They had known only endless forests, their days measured by the sway of ancient trees. Now, free of the ring, each new horizon filled them with awe. "That's perfectly all right," Lucian said, giving her a reassuring nod. "At this pace it won't take more than 5 days to reach Dothonian." He spoke matter-of-factly. A few extra days on the road made no difference to him. Along the way, he'd continue sharing magical studies with Lucian and Galadriel, so a leisurely journey would neither interrupt his research nor slow his progress. Lucian reined in his great stag as Galadriel surveyed the newly purified expanse before them. "It's a pity you cleansed the Valley of Death," she sighed, regret lacing her voice. "If darkness still festered here, our journey would have been far more exhilarating." Lucian shook his head with a wry smile. "I prefer it this way, my lady. We travel in safety now, free to admire every sight, without worrying about ambushes or shadow beasts." He reached out from his saddle, trailing his fingers along a stray branch above. At his gentle touch, dormant leaves unfurled and buds burst into bloom, scattering petals on the breeze. The stag flicked its antlers, majestic as gnarled wood, while Lucian marveled at the blossoming magic. 2 days later, the Grey Elf company pressed into the heart of what had once been called the Uncanny Valley. Morning mist curled around their boots as they paused on a hillock. Lucian, barely containing her excitement, tugged Lucian's cloak and pointed eastward. "Look, Lucian, is that the legendary Gordoris Mountains?" He shaded his eyes and peered through the haze. Jagged peaks rimmed with snow sliced the sky like ancient spears. "Yes, over those mountains lies Dothonian." Lucian's face lit up. Lucian returned her smile, his heart stirring at the promise of new lands and new adventures just beyond the Gordoris range. Lucian's brow lifted in surprise. "You want to go straight through? Shouldn't we skirt around the mountains instead?" She recalled Galadriel's warning well. The Gorgoroth peaks, dubbed the Terror Mountains, were infested with vast, venomous spiders whose silken webs carpeted every crevice. Even Morgoth's orc hosts and the mightiest of the elves once found it safer to take the long way around. Lucian shook his head, determination in his voice. "A detour would cost us precious time. We need a direct line between Dorthonion and Doriath if we hope to maintain swift communication." In truth, he harbored a bolder plan, to purge these mountains of their arachnid scourge once and for all. For these monstrous spiders were no mere beasts, but descendants of Ungoliant, the primeval spider goddess. It was Ungoliant who had woven Morgoth's cloak of darkness, shielding him from the Valar's sight as he lurked beneath the 2 trees of Valinor. When Morgoth felled those trees, Ungoliant drank deeply of their cooling sap and even tasted the waters of Varda's hidden well, growing in dread power and malevolence. "Very well," Lucian said at last, gathering her resolve. "If you're set on this course, then I will follow. But pray tell, Lucian, how do you propose we face such a brood?" Lucian met her gaze, steel in his expression. "With blade and courage, my friend, we march at first light." Even after he fled back to Middle-earth, Lucian had managed the impossible. He ensnared Morgoth in his own spider silk, nearly finished him off, and swallowed 3 Silmarils. Yet Morgoth answered with a host of Balrogs, driving Lucian into retreat. Those colossal spiders are as deadly as the legends say. No mere elf can stand against them. But fire is their ancient weakness, and Lucian's mastery of flame, especially on a grand scale, turns the tide every time. A crooked grin tugged at his lips. This journey, he decided, was far from dull. Galadriel, listening to his plan, broke into a bright smile and gave her wholehearted approval. The small company strode on, laughter and easy chatter echoing down the mountain pass. Then Lucian's brow darkened. "Halt," he barked, his voice cutting through the light-hearted talk. "Tell everyone to stop. Enemies are coming." A chill ran down his spine as a familiar shadow force swept toward them. Galadriel's eyes flashed with alarm, and at her side Lucian stiffened. In perfect unison they cried, "Hold your ground! Form up! Defensive line!" The Grey Elves, moments before idly admiring the scenery, snapped to attention. Shields clanged into place and spears leveled in a solid wall of iron and wood. Bows came up, arrows knocked. In silence, broken only by the faint hiss of tension, They waited for the first strike of the dark hosts. Perhaps it was simply that these troops had enjoyed too many quiet years without real combat. Their defensive line was riddled with gaps and blind spots, an endless source of frustration for Lucian, who admittedly had no idea how to deploy them properly. He couldn't help but roll his eyes as he surveyed their half-hearted barriers. Then, without warning, a ripple of crimson mist tore through the sky and coalesced before the ranks. It solidified into a sleek winged figure that landed with eerie grace. This was Morgoth's envoy, a vampire lord accompanied by his personal guard. He had slipped across the mountains of terror under cover of night and spent days scouring the Valley of Death for any trace of Sauron, only to return, so far, empty-handed. Chapter 351, Galadriel's Warm Wine for Sauron. The Grey Elves, long cloaked in reserve, had finally taken a stand. Sauron watched them with keen amusement, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the ring on his right hand. Then he turned his cool, dark gaze to Lucian, the lone human among these elves, and a predator's smile curved his lips. Well, well, he mused, his voice smooth as silk. The Grey Elves have decided to show their claws. How entertaining. And here we meet again so soon, Lucian. But mark my words, this time, you're the one who'll flee. He chuckled, low and confident. Across from him stood only 200 Grey Elves, no legendary master like Finrod among their ranks, and behind Sauron waited his fearsome vampire guards from Wolf Island, creatures whose power eclipsed anything these elves could muster. Most alarming of all was the ring's potency. By his calculations, its dark strength had tripled since their clash at the Grand Canyon. That loss had not been because Lucian was stronger, far from it, but because Sauron had been caught unawares by this human and the elf prince. With the shock of his last defeat now transformed into cold resolve, Sauron was certain of one thing. Nothing would stop his triumph today. Sauron's lips curled into a cruel smile. He was certain he could utterly crush Lucian and the Grey Elves before him, capture them, drag them back to Demon Wolf Island, and exact slow, savage vengeance. As he spoke, a surge of malevolent energy burst from his form. In an instant, the air above Death Valley crackled with raw darkness, tripling in intensity and snuffing out the valley's light. The land that Lucian had painstakingly cleansed moments ago reverted to its former, shadow-choked desolation. Lucian stared, astonished by the palpable shift in power. His strength, it's grown so much, he breathed. Not long ago, he and Finrod had driven the Demon King into a frantic retreat. Now Sauron's aura was 3, or even 4 times stronger, as if he'd tapped into some forbidden wellspring of power. Lucian's eyes narrowed, but a confident smirk appeared on his face. Lucky for me, my own edge is still sharper. Otherwise, I'd be the one running today. As Sauron's dark energy swelled menacingly, the two forces readied themselves for the clash yet to come. When Lucian first faced Sauron down in the Grand Canyon, he was still green. He hadn't mastered the laws of the Fae, wasn't yet a 5th-level ability user, had never endured the raw essence of thunder, wasn't known as the Drakebane magician, and certainly hadn't become a dragon himself. But now, after tireless study and training, his power had grown at least tenfold. That increase in strength was important, but what truly mattered was his new edge over Sauron. Corrupted by Morgoth, Sauron fed on darkness and recoiled from light, and Lucian had learned to exploit exactly that weakness. He knew a duel with Melian would be a far tougher challenge. Her own Maya power wasn't so easily countered, and he'd have to rely on sheer force alone. But facing Sauron? For the first time, Lucian felt real confidence. Of course, he would not stand alone. By his side, Galadriel's might already surpassed what Finrod had shown when he helped repel Sauron on that first encounter, and Luthien, whose enchantments could ensnare even Morgoth, outmatched them both. With such allies and his newly honed abilities, Lucian's resolve was ironclad. He would meet Sauron again, and this time he would triumph. The 200 Grey Elves arrayed before Lucian were no ordinary soldiers. They were the very champions Thingol had handpicked after days of rigorous trials. Each was a seasoned master, outclassing even the finest Noldor warriors in strength and skill. Confident of victory, Sauron had swaggered into Death Valley expecting to toy with a frightened mouse. What he didn't realize was that his mouse was more like a heavily muscled kangaroo, coiled for one devastating strike. "I spared you once," Lucian called out, his voice echoing over the blasted plain. "This time, I won't let you walk away." A swirl of shadow answered him. Far above, Sauron and his lieutenant Gothmog, Morgoth's two greatest lieutenants, materialized in the choking gloom. To slay either of them would deal a crippling blow to their master's power. Even more astonishing was Sauron's boldness in bringing so few troops and plunging straight into the enemy's rear. Death Valley lay wedged between the Noldor stronghold to the east and the Grey Elf kingdom to the west. No hidden passages back to Angband this time, no flapping wings to bear him to safety. With a slow, deliberate motion, Lucian lifted his right hand and curled his fingers into a challenge. "Come," he said, voice dripping with defiance. "Let's finish this. Lowly human, you'll pay for your arrogance." Sauron's eyes flared with rage as he stood amid the windswept ruins of Death Valley. How dare any mortal challenge him at the very height of his power? With a roar, he drew the jet-black blade from his belt, certain his foe would cower or flee, or better yet, kneel and beg for mercy. But Lucian did neither. Stepping forward without hesitation, he raised his staff and intoned clearly, "Light magic, fairy law." In that instant, he unleashed the purest torrent of light magic ever conceived to counter the darkness. The ground beneath them cracked as ancient runes blazed to life, forming a vast, glowing circle. From its center, a spear of searing radiance shot upward, engulfing Sauron in blistering brilliance. "It's you," Lucian whispered, his voice calm despite the crackling energy around them. "It's you the Master has been searching for." Staggering under the attack, Sauron slammed his hand to the one ring at his finger. With a gesture, he summoned a roiling cloak of shadow that swallowed the light whole. When the glare finally dimmed, he collapsed to one knee, chest heaving, his crimson eyes wide with disbelief. This is impossible," he panted, staring at Lucian as if the very laws of magic had shattered before him. "How can you, a mere human, wield such devastating light power?" Sauron's voice thundered across the chamber. He knew everything about the Vera and Maya spirits. This Lucian was no divine avatar, merely a flesh-and-blood man. And yet Lucian's light magic had outshone even the Mayas, sending a shockwave that should have pulverized any ordinary caster. Without the protection of that ring, the blast would have cut him in two. Even with it, Lucian still bore stubborn bruises where the energy struck home. Worse for Sauron, the spell had clearly drained Lucian almost to collapse. His face was chalky white, his breathing shallow, proof that the technique demanded a terrible toll on a human body. If Lucian could refine and deploy it at will, the vampires here wouldn't dare stand their ground. They'd scatter like leaves in a gale. "Kill him!" Sauron snarled, abandoning any thought of capture or interrogation. He marshaled his entire legion of vampires and surged forward, determined to finish Lucian before he could summon that horrid light a second time. "Lucian!" Lucian raced to his side, concern flooding his voice. Lucian's knees threatened to buckle. His pale face and labored breaths left no doubt he was on the verge of collapse. Lucian reached out to steady him, eyes blazing with worry. "Can you hold on?" Galadriel drew her slender elven sword and vaulted onto her great horned stag, rallying the Grey Elves as she charged straight at Sauron. With a triumphant cry, she called back to Luthien, "Warm me a cup of spiced fruit wine. I'll need it after I've felled Sauron." Luthien couldn't help but smile. Of all the stories Lucian had spun for her, her favorite was the one about elves heating wine to steel themselves against orcs. Now they had a chance to put that very tactic to use, against Morgoth's own lieutenant, no less. "I'm perfectly all right," Lucian replied, laying a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You'd better go help Galadriel. She can't face Sauron on her own." Relieved to see he truly was unscathed, Luthien nodded and turned away. Lucian braced himself for the coming battle, then sprinted after Galadriel and the Grey Host as they thundered towards Sauron's dark banner. Chapter 352, 5 Elements Kabbalah Sealing Boundary, Second Update. It seems that even in my dragon form, wielding the law of the fairy, I still can't kill Sauron. Lucian pressed his palm against a gnarled ancient oak. Instantly, tendrils of emerald vitality streamed into him, replenishing the reserves he had spent moments ago. He flexed his newly unfurled wings and surveyed the battlefield, his mind racing over the intricate pattern he needed to complete. In human guise, the law of the fairy hadn't been strong enough to fell Sauron in a single blow, and now, even in draconic might, the Dark Lords still stood. If Lucian failed again, Sauron would vanish back to Angband, and all their efforts would be wasted. That was why he had allowed Galadriel to meet Sauron head-on. He hadn't intervened because he needed her, and Luthien, to hold the Dark Lord at bay long enough for him to finish the ritual. Slowly, he extended both arms and drew in the 5 elemental currents: earth, water, fire, wood, and metal. Around the clearing, sigils of glowing light sprang into existence, weaving together into the 5 elements Kabbalah sealing boundary. Once the barrier closed, Sauron would be trapped, unable to escape back to Angband. Only then could Lucian unleash his full power to end the Dark Lord's reign. He just needed a few more precious moments, and the boundary would be complete. Lucian had recently mastered a 5-element sealing technique from the Lee clan. By fusing it with the Kabbalistic wards and boundary runes he'd learned earlier, he forged his own 5-element Kabbalah sealing array. It boasted no offensive spells. Its strength lay purely in defense, both reinforcing from within and repelling attacks from without. The catch, of course, was that erecting the formation took precious moments. Pressing himself against a shattered wall on the battlefield's edge, Lucian extended a single finger and began to carve runes into the air. His gestures echoed the intricate patterns of fairy tales' warding barriers, but the words he spoke came straight from the Puritan mage's grim grimoire. This careful marriage of style and substance ensured that neither parchment nor power would burn away under pressure. His voice cut through the din of combat. By the primal flame that shaped the world, rise and hunt the Witch King. At once, the runes blazed. From the scorched earth, a colossal woman of living fire emerged. Her flaming hair streamed behind her like a banner, and her eyes glowed with unquenchable heat as she crouched in readiness. Without pausing, Lucian pivoted to another vantage. Again, he traced luminous sigils in the void, invoking earth rather than fire. From clay shaped by divine breath, awaken and protect this seal, Stone Colossus. The ground trembled. With a roar of fractured rock, a massive golem formed, its granite limbs hewn from the battlefield itself. The twin guardians now stood sentinel at opposite flanks, their presence anchoring the seal's power. In moments, Lucian's 5-element Kabbalah sealing array was complete. The fiery sentinel and the stone giant bound its boundary, fortifying the barrier against any who dared approach. Satisfied, Lucian brushed a wisp of sweat from his brow and refocused on the Witch King looming at the heart of the fray. The true test was only just beginning. The water giant, the metal giant, the wood giant, the fire giant, and the earth giant each took their place in the 5 elements formation. Lucian pressed his fingers into a Taoist seal, then slammed his palms onto the ground with authority. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth, 5-element sealing formation, activate! Elemental energies roared from the giants, spiraling skyward to weave a vast, glowing array. At its heart, a black and white yin-yang symbol swirled, drawing in the power of heaven and earth until the entire battlefield lay shrouded beneath its influence. This living elemental colossus, born of Kabbalistic magic, served as the formation's unassailable eye. No weapon or brute force could dismantle. Any attempt at destruction merely caused it to reform. Traditionally, the only ways to break such a construct would be to defeat its summoner or to unravel the Kabbalistic ritual that sustains it. But Lucian had mastered fairy tales' arcane methods to perfect his invocation, sealing off every weakness in the ritual itself. With all other avenues closed, there remained only one way to shatter the formation: overcome Lucian, the caster. If they could defeat Lucian himself, there'd be no danger of getting trapped in the 5-element Kabbalah sealing formation. Its chief purpose isn't to keep the caster in, but to imprison any enemy who's already been crippled. Forged from 5 indestructible elemental titans and infused with advanced barrier magic, this formation is all but impervious. Even if Lucian shifted into his draconic form, tearing through those seals by brute force would take at least half an hour, far too long in the heat of battle. And because the formation can both lock foes inside and fend off outside attacks, it vastly outclasses Lucian's usual personal barrier spells, even his super protective ward. The moment the seals snapped into place, the formation's rippling magic flares drew Sauron's full attention. He swung his enchanted sword to drive Galadriel and Lucian back, then abandoned the vampire warriors to confront the new threat. Galadriel and Lucian fell back alongside the wounded Grey Elves, racing to Lucian's side as Sauron advanced. Sauron, Ringbearer, Lord of Shadow, was simply too powerful. Even after Lucian's law of recording had rent through his goblin forces and dealt grievous harm, he remained unnervingly composed as he faced Galadriel and Lucian. Had Lucian not sprung his sealing barrier at the last moment, both he and the Lady of Light would have been overwhelmed in seconds. Galadriel's chest heaved with rapid breaths, disbelief etched into every line of her face. She had known Sauron was formidable, but not to this extent. Even with Lucian fighting at her side, they had only barely kept pace with his relentless onslaught. "He's incredibly strong," she murmured, voice trembling. Wiping sweat from his brow, Lucian weighed a desperate gambit. He could unleash his hypnotic song, a sweeping enchantment that would seize the minds of Sauron and every vampire in his thrall. The catch, it would be an indiscriminate trance, snaring Galadriel, the Grey Elves, even Lucian himself. But if he could afterwards lift the spell's hold on his allies, he could trigger the teleportation rite he'd perfected and spirit them all to safety. It was a risk, perhaps their only hope. Galadriel's face fell at Lucian's words. She had hoped that, under his hypnosis, they might strike Sauron down while he slept. But as Lucian had warned, anyone lulled by the spell would awaken the moment they sensed hostile intent. Her chance to slay the Dark Lord slipped away in an instant, and the general's panicked rout during their first forest encounter now felt like a bitter mockery. "Damn it," Galadriel muttered, scowling. "It's so frustrating." Lucian met her gaze calmly. "It wasn't meant as an assassination tool," he explained. "You can't attack those under a gentle hypnosis. That would break the spell immediately." Galadriel's disappointment sharpened into curiosity. All around them, 5 towering elemental giants, earth, fire, air, water, and lightning, loomed like silent sentinels over the battlefield. It was the masterstroke Lucian had prepared. If those colossal beings were as powerful as they looked, perhaps they could overpower Sauron and his vampire lieutenants after all. "Lucian," she pressed, "is this array strong enough? If your giants can really hurt him, the 3 of us might stand a chance." Lucian shook his head. "They're not designed to deal damage," he said. "This is primarily a sealing formation, meant to contain Sauron and his vampires, keep them from breaking free. They support the barrier, but they're not offensive weapons." A cold, mocking laugh echoed across the field. Sauron himself stood, beyond the circle of iron-bound stones, his armor gleaming like midnight oil. "A seal, you say?" he taunted, voice low and venomous. "You think you can trap me, mortal? No, it is you who would flee. Such petty defenses fail before my power." Galadriel straightened, her eyes blazing with defiance. Beside her, Lucian's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. The giants shifted in unison, earth trembling beneath their feet. Though the sealing array was not meant to strike, it still held the Dark Lord within its bounds. For how long, none could tell. And as Sauron took a cautious step forward, testing the barrier's strength, the 3 allies braced for the clash that would decide the fate of Middle-earth. Lucian's voice rang out across the clearing. "I swear I won't run from you a second time." At his words, Sauron slammed his magic sword, blade first, into the soft earth and threw back his head in a mocking laugh. No doubt the 2 elven women before him were stronger than he'd anticipated, but in his eyes they still posed no real threat. Their blows only grazed his defenses, and the human at their side who had unleashed that brilliant flash of light clearly exhausted himself in the attempt. So now they hoped to trap him behind some hastily conjured barrier and snatch victory from his teeth. Pathetic. Even granted extraordinary power, humans remained creatures of limited wit, and these elves were nothing but their obedient guards. Sauron shook his head, a cruel smile curling his lips. Let them try. He was in no hurry to show them just how little they stood to gain. Chapter 353, The Miserable Sauron, 3rd update. "Lucian, dismantle that magic circle, now." Galadriel's voice rang out, urgent and firm. Drawing on the divine power his mother had passed down to him, Lucian knelt beside the glowing runes etched into the ground. With a soft hum, the circle's light splintered and died. No sooner had the seal broken than he lifted his head and began the low hypnotic melody, each note aimed at luring their foe into a trance. At the same moment, Galadriel's eyes shone with silvery light. She stepped forward, unleashing a beam of blinding radiance to stall the enemy. "Not yet," she shouted over the din. "Give me space, hold him back, and I'll deal with him." Believing she was leaping into danger, Lucian shot forward and grabbed her by the shoulder, yanking her away from the front lines. Galadriel stumbled, surprised, and Lucian pressed a hand gently over her lips. Her emerald gaze widened. "What are you?" she began. "You'll ruin my chant," Lucian murmured, his expression calm but serious. "Don't worry, I'm all right." Galadriel pulled his hand away and searched his face. He offered her a confident smile. "Remember when I purified the Valley of Death? I was drained for days afterward." He shrugged. "This time, I'm fully recovered. I didn't even use 10% of my strength back then." Her tension eased. Galadriel nodded. Lucian straightened, inhaled deeply, and then resumed his haunting song. The air around them rippled, and even the shadows seemed to waver. Sauron himself was already beginning to falter. "This Sauron is no match for me." Lucian's voice was low but confident. He felt the surge of power coursing through him, freshly drawn from the ancient forest beyond the Grey Elf kingdom. Back in the Elven realm, he'd held back, too ashamed to drain the venerable trees of their life essence, knowing they were Millions' cherished wards and guarded by fierce treelings. Here, however, far from prying eyes and protective spirits, he'd allowed himself to replenish every last ounce of his strength. Galadriel, standing off to one side, frowned in disbelief. "Lucian, don't get ahead of yourself," she said sharply. "You barely ever unleash 1/10 of your true power when we spar." She admitted he was strong, perhaps stronger than she'd ever encountered, but she couldn't accept such vast superiority. Lucian only smiled. He spread his great wings, feeling the air ripple beneath them as he began to ascend. "Whether you believe me or not," he replied softly, "you'll know soon enough." With that, he began to chant an ancient word of power under his breath. An Imagus transformation. In an instant, his form swelled outward. Limbs stretched and bones reshaped themselves. Scales rolled across his flesh like molten iron, and wings unfurled until they spanned miles of sky. Where once stood a lone man, now loomed a winged dragon 1/2 kilometer in length, the first of its kind ever to grace Middle-earth. Galadriel's eyes widened. All at once, the skies over the clearing were filled with Lucian's thunderous roar, and every creature below stared upward in awe and fear. The true test of his might was only just beginning. Lucian stood before Glaurung, the first ancestor dragon Morgoth had ever forged, a colossal, wingless beast stranded forever on the earth. He felt a shiver of disbelief. How could such a mighty creature lack wings? Sauron loomed beside Lucian, studying him with disdain. Until now, the Dark Lord's eyes had hovered over him like a jeering clown's, but in that moment they snapped sharp and calculating. It wasn't that Sauron had never witnessed winged dragons. Morgoth had already set in motion their creation, but those drakes were still embryonic, buried deep beneath the forge of Angband, gathering power they had yet to master. 3 centuries ago, Morgoth had wrought Glaurung, testing the limits of draconic might, but found him wanting. Unwilling to rest on that first success, the Darkvala refined his designs again and again. At last he breathed life into a new breed of drakes, dragons born with vast, leathery wings and unimaginable strength. Their greatest scion, Uncalagon the Black, would eclipse even Glaurung's fearsome power. Yet none of these winged children were yet fully grown. They slumbered in Angband's volcanic depths, feasting on raw energy, awaiting the day they would ascend. So why, Sauron's eyes asked, did this human stand before them, exuding the very aura of those unborn winged dragons? Lucian clenched his fists, steadying himself. In a world shaped by titans and Valar, he alone bore proof that Morgoth's ultimate creation was no longer confined to the depths, and in that revelation lay the spark of something far more dangerous than any dragon. Light magic, fairy law. Before Lucian could unravel the mystery between that human and his master Morgoth, a magic circle 10 times larger than the first flared into being beneath him. His draconic form crackled with overwhelming power, far beyond anything he'd displayed in his human guise, and the fairy law he was about to cast swelled to truly terrifying heights. Boom! A blinding pillar of white light descended upon the Valley of Death, scorching the earth and reducing every vampire but Sauron to smoldering ash. Lucian didn't pause to mourn them. Their vanished life force was insignificant compared to the strength he now wielded. Ah! Even protected by his ring, Sauron screamed as the radiance seared his flesh. Lucian let out another roar. Light magic. Fairy law. He unleashed the spell a second time. In dragon form, his vitality and magical reserves rebounded almost instantly, leaving him poised to strike again without hesitation. Lucian's arms trembled with fatigue after unleashing a dozen consecutive goblin-binding spells. He staggered back to the gnarled roots of a devouring tree, pressing trembling palms against its bark to siphon the raw life essence he so desperately needed. Even as his strength seeped back into him, he didn't hesitate. Sauron, once a noble Maya, now Morgoth's twisted servant and master of orcs, feared the purifying power of light above all else. No intricate incantation would serve him better than relentless radiant assault. He thrust his staff forward and called down a blinding bolt of pure luminosity. Then again, and again. Each volley struck Sauron's armored form so fiercely that the Dark Lord reeled under the onslaught. By the fifth strike, his endurance shattered. With a guttural roar, Sauron wove a swift transformation spell, his flesh twisting into the sinuous body of an immense serpent. In that monstrous form, he fled at impossible speed. Life mattered more than pride, but freedom eluded him. No sooner had the serpent coiled around a boulder than it slammed headlong into an invisible barrier. Repeatedly, Sauron surged against the wall, unleashing blasts of black energy, yet the force held firm. At its center shimmered the intricate glow of Lucian's five-element Kabbalah ceiling formation. Radiant light crackled along every rune, burning away the gloom. The great serpent stilled, its forked tongue flicking uncertainly. Beneath the searing glow, Sauron's golden eyes narrowed. He studied the flawless magic circle, and for the first time in ages, the Dark Lord did not move. Lucian, the most learned of the Maiar, had never seen a magic circle woven quite like this, but he recognized its secret almost at once. The circle's power rested on 5 elemental giants: earth, metal, wood, water, and fire. Destroy any one of them, and the entire seal would shatter, granting him an escape. In a flash, Sauron, now a colossal serpent coiled within the circle, struck at the earth giant. With a single crushing bite, the creature, hewn from living stone, crumbled into powder. "How?" the Dark Lord hissed in disbelief. Before the word even left his tongue, the earth giant reassembled itself. Shards and boulders snapped back together in a heartbeat, and once again it stood firm. Sauron's jaws closed on it again, pulverizing rock into dust. But each time, the giant reformed as if nothing had happened. Frustrated, he turned his wrath on the 4 remaining pillars: metal, wood, water, and fire, only to find the same unbreakable cycle repeating itself. No matter how ferociously he struck, the giants would not stay destroyed, and the magic circle held fast. High above the battlefield, Lucian watched without lifting a finger. He resisted every temptation to intervene or to exploit the gaps in Sauron's attacks as the Goblin's Law flared around him. He understood all too well that the more the Dark Lord battered himself against those wards, the weaker he would emerge. Let him exhaust himself first, Lucian decided. Only then would the real confrontation begin. Lucian's lips curled into a grim smile as he finished tracing the last rune around the glowing circle. With a final incantation, the air snapped shut, sealing Sauron inside. No matter how vast his sorcery, the Dark Lord would need days, perhaps weeks, to untangle these layered wards, drawn not from a single tradition, but from the magical lore of several worlds. In mere hours, escape was all but impossible. Sauron's eyes flared red. "Very well," he snarled. "I'll fight." The chamber trembled as the Dark Lord unleashed every ounce of his shadowy power. He shot upward, the runes quivering under the assault, then plummeted toward Lucian like a black comet. Fangs bared, Sauron clamped down on Lucian's neck, undaunted even by the scorching agony of the Goblin Ward's curse that lashed him whenever the circle's barrier was disturbed. Trapped, cornered, and raging with fury, he knew the only way out was through bloodshed. Chapter 354, The Temptation of Morgoth. "Another giant snake? The last one you sent at me was bigger than this." Lucian's voice rang out as Sorin's form contorted, scales shifting and flesh swelling until he stood as a titanic serpent ready to coil and crush. Lucian shook his head, his own frame surging with the power of his giant magic. In an instant, he eclipsed Sorin's new size and lunged, dragon claws outstretched, seizing the serpent's neck in midair. Had Sauron struck with everything he had at the start, Lucian might now be facing a severe headache, or worse. But after enduring wave upon wave of fairy-light sorcery, Sauron was badly wounded, scarcely able to muster half his former strength. In all honesty, this monstrous snake form felt less threatening than the terror snake once manifested by Kul, Odin's brother and the god of fear. It wasn't that Sauron's innate power lagged behind Kul's. It was that the suppressive radiance of fairy law weighed far more heavily on Sauron. Moreover, Lucian himself had grown far stronger since that battle with Kul. With a roar, Lucian drove Sauron's oversized body back down to the earth. His claws, sharp as dragon-forged blades, held the wounded serpent fast. The ground trembled under the weight of their clash, but Lucian's grip never wavered. At this moment, he knew he stood firmly in control of the battlefield, and one step closer to answering Morgoth's dark temptation. Lucian stood at the heart of the shattered cavern, eyes blazing with determination. He summoned the last of his power, and from the dragon's gaping maw erupted a triple-hued inferno, crimson, azure, and gold, blasting outward in a roaring conflagration. Below, the iron sand that carpeted the earth obeyed his will. It surged skyward, it twisting into a gargantuan chain that lashed around the serpent-formed Sauron, clamping his snapping jaws shut. Simultaneously, Lucian's claws crackled with over 1 billion volts of arc lightning. From the storm-laden sky, violet thunder hurled itself down, infused with the ancient runes of goblin lore. Sauron retaliated, pouring every shred of his dark energy into a writhing coil of flesh and shadow that sought to strangle Lucian's throat. But the stratagems and might that Lucian wielded proved too many. With a final shuddering roar, the would-be god of darkness snapped apart. The great snake-body Sauron had assumed split asunder like an eagle tearing at a venomous serpent. Flesh and sinew scattered in a blaze of fire, lightning, and searing light until nothing remained but drifting motes of power. In that last, resonant whisper, his disembodied voice echoed through the ruins. "Human, I will return." With his physical form shattered, Sauron's spirit billowed into the air, unresolved and wrathful. Yet no mortal blade had truly slain him. Both Valar and Maya are divine spirits who, upon entering Middle-earth, condense themselves into bodies capable of action. When those bodies are destroyed, the spirit endures. The lesser Maya, those who have not bound themselves irreversibly to their chosen shape, are simply expelled from Arda, returning to the halls of Iluvatar. Thus it was with the Balrogs, and thus it now must be with Sauron. His essence retreats into the void, waiting for the moment he can strike again. Lucian never doubted that a Maya of Sauron's stature could rebuild a body from nothing, so long as his fractured spirit remained free. But he would not grant Sauron the time he needed. As the defeated Dark Lord sagged back toward human form, Lucian reached into the pocket of his cloak and withdrew a matte black Matryoshka doll carved from obsidian. Whispering the sealing incantation he'd learned long ago in the magician's apprentice's hidden tome, he pressed the smallest figurine to Sauron's brow. "No!" Sauron's roar trembled through the clearing, his great power flickering like dying embers. But the moment he hesitated, Lucian let loose a final, echoing verse. The little doll snapped shut of its own accord, swallowing the Maya's disembodied soul into its nested shell. Lucian closed his eyes and exhaled, slipping the sealed doll into a dimensional pouch at his belt. "The soul of a high Maya. It may yet serve a purpose," he murmured. He'd barely taken a step when the ground at his feet rippled. Where Sauron's spear had been, a ring hovered in midair, forged of gleaming black iron and etched with runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. Compelled by a force he could not name, Lucian picked it up and found himself sliding it onto his finger. The instant the cold metal kissed his skin, a voice whispered through his mind, "Follow me, and I will grant you endless life, endless knowledge, and endless power." Lucian froze. The forest held its breath, and somewhere deep inside that silent promise he felt something stir. Lucian's vision darkened as a hiss slithered through his mind. "You will become one of the masters of this world, your power greater even than the gods." The whisper was cold and reptilian, feeding on his doubts, threatening to drown him in Morgoth's malevolent will. Then, as if on cue, the eyes of his primary Marvel avatar snapped open. In an instant, every one of his counterparts, the wizard in Hogwarts, the mage in Magnolia's guild, the apprentice sorcerer, the espers of Academy City, and even the young Cardcaptor jerked awake across their divergent worlds. Their souls cried out in unison, "Get out of here!" A thunderous roar erupted, echoing through Middle-earth. Lucian's spiritual strength flared, surging sevenfold. Morgoth's creeping corruption recoiled and shattered under the combined force of Lucian and his scattered incarnations. Clarity flooded Lucian's senses as he reasserted control of his soul. "Seal!" Lucian commanded, his voice ringing like a bell. In his hand, the ring, an insidious conduit for Morgoth's influence, glowed with dark energy. With precise seals and arcane gestures, Lucian wove a barrier around the band of gold and black iron, severing its link to the fallen Vala. When he was certain the evil had been contained, Lucian drew the ring free and held it up to the light. He turned it slowly between his fingers, studying every rune and shadowed facet, determined to uncover how Morgoth's power could have manifested here, at this crucial moment. Lucian pressed the ring back onto his finger and let out a slow breath. In the established timeline, Sauron himself forged the Supreme Ring to dominate elves, men, and dwarves after Morgoth's prison, but this version of the ring should never have existed. By all appearances, history in Middle-earth has already veered far from its original course. This ring felt far more like something Morgoth might have crafted himself. Only then could it bore into Lucian's soul so insidiously. A blessing in disguise, perhaps. Just moments ago, as Morgoth's corruption threatened to consume the soul of Lucian's clone, something extraordinary happened. The original Lucian and every other version of him across countless worlds sensed the danger at once and instinctively poured every ounce of their spiritual power into this single vessel. The result was a sudden, overwhelming surge of soul energy that forcibly repelled Morgoth's assault. Lucian flexed his fingers, marveling at what had occurred. If he could learn to direct this ability at will, funneling the souls and magic of any or all of his counterparts into whichever body he chose, he would wield an unprecedented ace in the hole. And it truly was no ordinary trump card. Lucian's trump card grows stronger with every clone he creates, and with every clone, his potential increases. Though he currently stands at the demigod father level, pooling the combined power of all his duplicates could very well elevate him to full godfather status in mere moments. The secret lies in their perfect harmony. Each clone shares Lucian's physique and abilities, and when their strength is merged, there's no friction or discord. Naturally, mastering such a feat won't happen overnight. Today's breakthrough was a fortunate accident, not a finished technique. In time, however, Lucian believes he might even forge pathways between worlds, using his clones as living conduits. "If this ring was crafted by Morgoth with Sauron's assistance," he murmured, tracing its runic engravings, "it must hold a treasury of Morgoth's arcane knowledge and power." Lucian released the final strands of the five-element Kabbalistic sealing circle and turned to face Lucian, Galadriel, and the Grey Elves. They stared back at him in stunned silence. The swift, fierce duel with Sauron had unfolded so rapidly and so spectacularly that none of them had yet recovered from the shock. Stepping forward, Lucian waved his hand, snapping everyone out of their trance. "It's over. Let's move on." Galadriel grabbed his arm, eyes wide with disbelief. "Lucian, how did you turn into a dragon just now?" He smiled. "Remember when we princes slew Glorung, the dragon Morgoth created? I crafted a spell to absorb its power. After a few tweaks, I could shift into a dragon form, just like you saw." Chapter 355, The First Great Demon Director Wu, Second Update. Galadriel's emerald eyes shone with hope. "So it's still possible. Can I learn that magic?" Lucian gave her a steady nod. "Yes, but there's a catch. You need the corpse of a dragon to refine a dragon crystal." He paused to let it sink in. "As long as a dragon has fallen and its crystal can be harvested, I'll help elves, dwarves, or humans implant one. You'll gain dragon-slaying spells, or even the power to transform into a dragon yourself. Strengthening our peoples against Morgoth is our best chance." Galadriel's shoulders sagged. "A dragon's corpse," she repeated, disappointment flickering across her face. Morgoth had created the dragons. Only one had ever appeared, and Lucian had already claimed its crystal. Just then, Luthien stepped forward, concern in her voice as she touched Lucian's arm. "Lucian, are you hurt?" He managed a gentle smile. I'm fine. Just a bit weary. Galadriel exchanged a troubled glance with Luthien, uncertainty clouding her features, but the determination in Lucian's eyes gave her hope. Although Galadriel, too, was astonished that Lucian could transform into a dragon, she didn't press him for details. Her first concern was whether he'd been hurt fighting the fearsome Sauron. "I'm all right," Lucian reassured them, brushing dust from his cloak. "You and Luthien absorbed most of Sauron's power earlier, so by the time I faced him, the strain was much less." He offered Luthien his hand, a cordial gesture that acknowledged their shared victory over Sauron. At once, Galadriel's disappointment vanished, replaced by bright pride. "That's exactly right," she declared, lifting her chin. Luthien laughed at the sight, and Galadriel teased her. "I see how it is. You're quite fond of Lucian, aren't you?" "Don't be ridiculous," Luthien replied with a rosy smile, giving Galadriel a playful tap on the head. Lucian watched them with a wry grin before turning his gaze to the path ahead. "Come on," he said. "Just beyond here, we leave the Valley of Death behind and enter the Dread Mountains." Lucian turned to his companions. "I'll go ahead and clear out the spiders. You all follow behind at a safe distance." With that, he shifted back into his colossal draconic form and winged toward the Terror Mountains. Moments later, he unleashed a roaring torrent of prismatic flame, red, blue, and gold, sweeping across the jagged slopes below. Wherever his multicolored fire touched, obsidian webs and ravenous spiders turned to ash, the cinders drifting down like a ghostly snow. Beneath the charred surface, a broad, smooth road began to form, stretching all the way from the Valley of Death to the foot of the Terror Mountains. Henceforth, travel between Dothonian and Doriath would be safe. "We're with you," Lucy called, taking Galadriel's hand. Together, the two summoned every gray elf in their host. Slender vines of emerald magic slithered over the blackened ground, coaxing grass to sprout and wildflowers to burst into bloom. In minutes, the once barren wasteland was transformed into a carpet of green, speckled with blossoms. The convoy, soldiers, healers, and supply wagons, pressed on, now winding through meadows instead of the spider-haunted slopes. Far to the north, in the obsidian chambers of the Angband caves, Morgoth's crimson eyes narrowed. His voice, cold and unyielding as iron, echoed through the halls. "What manner of creature is this? Lucian?" The Dark Lord stared in disbelief. Even now, this human could withstand his deepest temptations and still command such immense soul power? Peering through his palantir, he had witnessed every moment of the clash between Sauron and Lucian. He'd already suspected that the radiant force he'd sensed before, far stronger than any mere Maya, originated from a human. Yet seeing it in action revealed just how extraordinary Lucian truly was. Not only did he wield tremendous light magic, but when pushed, he could transform into a terrifying drake of darkness, his soul strength rivaling that of the gods themselves. Had the Dark Lord not confirmed Lucian's mortality by probing his essence, he would have sworn a Vala had descended to Middle-earth in disguise. In one sense, this was welcome news. The Valar still remained ignorant of events in Middle-earth and had not yet rallied against him. But there was a bitter irony, too. His cherished lieutenant, Sauron, had fallen to this single human opponent. A warrior of such caliber among mortals was the last thing his grand design needed. Chapter 7. The Awakening of the Dragon Host. Lucian stood at the summit of the volcanic plateau, its molten heat licking at his robes. He closed his eyes, reaching beyond the physical realm, and sent a soul message to the Fire Demon King in the distant east. "Gothmog," he intoned, "halt your western conquests. Instead, sweep through the eastern forests and seize every Noldor elf you find, especially the 7 sons of Feanor. Their lifeblood will nourish my dragons and hasten their transformation." 2 days later, Lucian returned to the elf city of Dothonian, flanked by a retinue of gray elves whose loyalty was bought with promises of knowledge and gold. Word of his pact with the Fire Demon King had spread, and alliances shifted like quicksilver. Yet the true marvel awaited within the city walls. At Lucian's newly founded Hogwarts Academy, the greatest scholars of every race, Noldor elves in silken robes, stern gray elves in ironclad tunics, stocky dwarves with braided beards, and eager human mages, gathered beneath one vast, vaulted hall. For the first time in history, the arcane runes of the elves were studied alongside dwarven metallurgy, while human alchemists worked side by side with sorcerers of every pedigree. In this crucible of learning, Lucian had accomplished what even the Valar could envy. He had amassed nearly every fragment of wisdom in Middle-earth. Outside those hallowed corridors, however, a darker enterprise was taking shape. Under Lucian's direction, Gothmog's legions roamed the eastern wilds, dragging enchanted shackles across elven ankles. The fate of the 7 sons of Fëanor was sealed. Their essence would feed the burgeoning dragon host, each soul blazing as kindling in gargantuan throats. Meanwhile, news of Lucian's ultimate triumph, the slaying of Sauron, had swept across the continent. Bards sung his name from the Grey Havens to the White Mountains. Mortals hailed him as the greatest hero of their age, while scholars whispered that he had done no man before could, conquer the Dark Lord and seize his ring of power. And yet, the master of so many secrets could not rest. In a hidden wing of the Fairy Tale Guild, far from the academies and battlefields of Middle-earth, Lucian crouched over a glowing orb, the legendary Fairy Ball. Below ground, in a dust-coated laboratory lit by floating will-o'-the-wisps, he meticulously traced ancient glyphs on its crystalline surface, probing its mysteries. A sharp rap at the door shattered the silence. Lucian's quill paused above the scroll. Heart still racing from dark bargains and world-shaping deeds, he looked up. "Enter," he called. Beyond that door lay another chapter in his extraordinary saga, one that would test the limits of magic, loyalty, and the fate of 2 worlds. Lucian set aside his quill and closed the leather-bound tome he'd been studying. A soft knock at the door interrupted the silence. "Macau," he called, rising to his feet. "You know better than to disturb me unless it's important." The door opened, and Macau stepped in, breathless. He held out a parchment sealed with the royal crest of Fiora Kingdom. "President, this is urgent. I can't decide for us. I need your direction." Lucian took the parchment and smoothed it out on his desk. His dark eyes skimmed the elegant calligraphy and colorful stamp. "The first Grand Mage martial arts competition of the Kingdom of Fiora?" he repeated, surprised. Macau nodded. "In 1 week, the royal family will host the inaugural contest in the capital, known as the City of Flowers. Its goal is to determine the kingdom's strongest wizard, D-Guild, and the prize is 30 million J." Lucian leaned back, folding his arms. "Has there ever been anything like this before?" "Never." Macau shook his head. "Our guild has always claimed to be the strongest, but that's only rumor. There's never been an official ranking." Lucian studied the royal seal again, the ornate crown engraved at the top of the notice. He tapped a finger against the parchment. A grand competition to legitimize the guild hierarchy, and with such a huge reward. The timing is curious. Why now? Macau hesitated, then met Lucian's gaze. "President, should we enter?" A slow smile curved Lucian's lips. His eyes gleamed with resolve. "Absolutely. Prepare the application. We'll show them exactly why our guild reigns supreme." Lucian glanced at the gilded proclamation tacked to the wall of the guild hall, its royal seal gleaming in the torchlight. "A kingdom-wide Wizard Guild Championship," it announced. "Open to every registered guild. Prizes, the title of the kingdom's strongest guild, exclusive royal contracts, and vast rewards." He folded his arms. "In the annals of magic, there is no true first, and in the world of wizardry, no unchallenged champion, until now. Everyone who valued prestige, power, or profit would rush to enter. Hundreds of guilds would swarm the registration desks like hungry wolves." "This isn't exactly groundbreaking," Lucian murmured under his breath. "But the outcome could change everything for us." Macau, his faithful lieutenant, rapped his knuckles on the heavy oak table. "Boss, are we signing up?" Lucian's dark eyes drifted back to the proclamation. A faint smile touched his lips. "Yes," he said quietly. "We're in." Chapter 356. Take It to the Skies, Update 1. The Fairy Tale Guild had once sat atop the kingdom's hierarchy, celebrated as the strongest mage guild in the land. All of that changed after the disaster on Tianlong Island. In its wake, every S-class wizard and every seasoned member of mid to high rank vanished without a trace. No one knew if they'd fallen in battle, been spirited away, or worse. Only the guild's president remained, Lucian. Rumors swirled of a daring rescue operation in the works, but no one could say when or if it would succeed. Meanwhile, the Imperial Magicians Tournament loomed on the horizon. Entering now with Lucian as the sole veteran and a handful of green recruits, was tantamount to suicide. The fairy tale banner would be shredded in the preliminaries, yet refusing to participate risked accelerating the guild's decline. Their reputation had already taken a brutal hit. At dawn, Lucian finally emerged from 2 months of seclusion. His eyes were sharp, his posture unyielding. He had spent those weeks poring over the arcane mysteries of the legendary fairy ball and refining the meteor star, the guild's ultimate weapon said to incorporate the very remains of its founding master. While he worked in isolation, all day-to-day affairs had fallen to his vice president, Macau. Lucian fixed Macau with a steady stare. "Tell me, Macau," he said quietly, "what's the state of our guild right now?" Macau's shoulders sagged. He lowered his head, unable to meet Lucian's gaze. The weight of his words hovered in the silent hall, a grim testament to the challenges facing Fairy Tale's last stand. "It's grim," the first wizard admitted, leaning forward. "Our guild simply isn't strong enough anymore. We can't tackle difficult jobs, so the assignments have all but dried up. With fewer tasks available, our income has plummeted. A number of our best mages have defected to larger, more powerful guilds, and with every departure, our strength wanes further, so we get even fewer commissions. It's a vicious cycle." "Precisely," Lucian said, absently stroking the whiskers of the small cat perched on his shoulder. He showed no surprise. In fact, he had foreseen this collapse, and on some level, encouraged it. Though Laxus's views struck many as extreme, Lucian recognized the truth behind them. In any world, the strong survive and command respect. No guild can flourish on bonds of friendship alone. Look at Fairy Tale, renowned for its tight-knit camaraderie, and yet when its elite mages vanished, its members scattered. If his guild continued down this path, it would soon find itself at the bottom of the kingdom's rankings. Lucian stood at the helm of the Magister's Guild with a clear goal in mind, to rebuild and strengthen it by recruiting the most gifted and promising mages he could find. Yet he knew he couldn't simply expel the weaker members. To do so would seem harsh, betray his predecessor's more charitable ethos, and breed resentment among those who remained. So Lucian employed a gentler strategy. He announced that he was diverting all guild resources into researching the mysterious fairy ball, claiming this work was essential to honor the old guildmaster's legacy. In practice, it gave him the perfect pretext to let the guild run itself for a while. Predictably, those who had joined only to bask in the guild's famed reputation, but lacked both skill and dedication, quietly dropped away as the organization appeared to falter. By the time Lucian resumed his full oversight, the guild had shed its fair-weather members. What remained wasn't an army of elite sorcerers, but a small band of mages whose loyalty ran deep. To Lucian, that devotion was every bit as important as raw power. He held a simple rule: a guild member must possess either extraordinary talent or unwavering loyalty. Without at least one of these qualities, they were of little use. Indeed, if his aim had been merely to finish the guild's toughest assignments, he could have spent half a day each week teleporting from one challenge to the next, and completed them all single-handedly. But Lucian's vision for the Magister's Guild was far grander than that. Lucian glared at the guild's notice board, fists clenched. "We can't let Fairy Ball slide into obscurity. Now is the perfect moment to sign up for the Grand Mage tournament and prove once and for all that we deserve to be called the strongest guild in the kingdom. If we beat every other guild in the land, powerful mages will flock to our banner. Our membership will swell, our reputation will soar, and more, and tougher, missions will come streaming in. The cycle will feed on itself. The stronger we grow, the more recruits we attract, and the more work we complete. Before long, I can retreat to the shopfront again, focus on my research, and let our guild flourish without having to babysit every single job. After all, I'm now the guild master. If the seal on Fairy Ball is lifted, and Master Makarov returns to find his guild fallen to the bottom rung, what face will he have as the fourth guild master? I won't let that happen." "But, Master Lucian," Macau interjected, pointing at the fine print on the announcement, "it specifically says the guild master is barred from competing." Lucian had just defeated the S-class mage Laxus in the inaugural Fairy Tale First Mage tournament, firmly establishing himself as the top S-class wizard. Yet, by the decree of the great demon director Wu, no guildmaster is permitted to compete. After all, Many guildmasters are S-class, or even members of the Holy Ten like Makarov, or the formidable Ghost Guild Master Joseph. If they ever clashed, the entire capital might be reduced to rubble. If Lucian can't fight, swapping in any other fairy tale member would lead to the same foregone conclusion. Leaning back in his chair, Lucian regarded Macau, Fairy Tale's cat-like administrator, with a casual smile. He reached out and tapped Macau's paw. "What's the problem here? Starting today, you're officially our 5th-generation guild master, Macau." Since the guild master himself is barred from the tournament, Lucian would temporarily pass the title to Macau. It wasn't as if Macau hadn't already handled every routine task around the guild hall. This just made it official. Once the tournament ends, the presidency would revert to Lucian without fuss or fanfare. It was a simple, practical solution, and Lucian saw no reason to overthink it. As long as Fairy Tale wins this year's competition, we'll attract all the powerful mages we need, and we won't have to scramble like this again at next year's contest. If my training stays on schedule, I might even crack the fairy ball mystery before the next tournament begins. By the time Natsu and the others return, the competition will already be handled. Macau froze in surprise, then exhaled and nodded. "I see, that's actually a pretty good plan." He'd had his doubts that Lucian alone could carry Fairy Tale to first place. After all, there were plenty of other S-class wizards in the running, and each team needed 5 members. The extra participants might slow Lucian down, but aiming for a mid to upper finish was realistic, and that would still send a clear message. Fairy Tale's strength can't be ignored. Better yet, it would guarantee a flood of assignments next year. "All right," Lucian said. "As our new president, you'll go to the town hall and register the guild's entry with the mayor. Then send word. Everyone must be here in 2 hours. I'll decide who fills the last 4 slots myself." With that settled, Lucian flicked his feline paw at Macau, signaling him to stand down, and return to the magical research he'd been forced to abandon. He still had no clue which apprentices would earn those final 4 places. Frankly, none of them had shown much promise. It looked like he'd have to escort them to Feiqi personally. Chapter 357, Kurokas, the Flower Capital, second update. "That's it. Seems most people are pretty practical," Lucian muttered under his breath, scanning the 20-odd wizards assembled in the Grand Hall. Fairy Tale had once boasted over 100 members. Even after the Tenru Island incident, nearly 100 remained, and today, fewer than 30. Lucian felt the weight of their dwindling numbers on his shoulders. "Macau should have filled you in," he began, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "To restore our guild's reputation, I'm entering this year's Kingdom Grand Magic Tournament. It calls for 5 participants. Who else is willing to sign up with me?" Silence stretched across the room. No hands rose. Back in the day, when Natsu and the others were active, the guild hall rang with daily sparring matches, floorboards splintered, tables overturned, rivalries igniting friendly brawls at every opportunity. Had the Grand Magic Tournament been announced then, wizards would have lined up to fight tooth and nail for each of those 5 coveted spots. Now, however, complacency reigned, and Lucian could only hope to spark some of that old fairy tale fire once more. Since the Tianlang Island disaster, the guild's morale had collapsed. Between the upheavals in leadership, the scarcity of new jobs, and half the squad turning in their guild marks, no one felt confident enough to face the upcoming tournament, certainly not alongside Lucian. "If Natsu and the others come back and hear about this," someone muttered, "they'll never let us live it down. We don't even have the guts to sign up." Lucian caught the room's sinking gaze and opted to goad them. He leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Guildmaster," he asked, "do you honestly believe Ribi and her team will return?" Sarusik, Ribi's most devoted follower and a stalwart of the Lane Engine team, looked pale and exhausted. Lucian had claimed that Ribi and her companions weren't slain by the Black Dragon at all, but trapped within the fairy ball's enchantment. Yet no one dared take his word for it. First, there was no proof that his theory was correct. Second, the fairy ball was one of Fairy Tale's 3 legendary magics, conceived by the first guildmaster and never taught to anyone else. Could Lucian really break its hold? And for weeks he'd vanished into the underground vault without so much as a progress report, leaving everyone to wonder whether they'd ever see Ribi again. Was he really just trying to comfort us? Those three persistent doubts about the expedition to Tianlong Island, about our comrades' safety, and about whether they'd ever return, had given rise to a tide of rumors in the guild. One by one, members drifted away, convinced the islanders were lost forever. Even stalwarts like Sarusuk and Dolaire, who'd already suffered the loss of friends and family, sank into despair. They haunted the guild hall day after day, unwilling to take on new missions. Lucian rose from his stool at the bar, poured himself a glass of wine, and addressed the downcast assembly. "Oh, I almost forgot," he said with a wry smile. "I've already begun studying the fairy sphere. At this rate, I'll have it fully mastered in 2 to 3 years, maybe as little as 1 or 2. From everything I've observed, its barrier is more than strong enough to keep Natsu and the others safe." He paused, letting his words sink in as he swirled the wine in his glass. "That said, we can't just sit here waiting for the sphere's full potential to be unlocked. If we do nothing, when the old guildmaster and our expedition finally return, they'll find the guild in ruins." His tone was firm, but not unkind. This wasn't empty reassurance. After months of painstaking research, Lucian truly had set the wheels in motion to master the fairy sphere and safeguard their friends. Lucian stood before the gathered guild members, confidence shining in his eyes. "As it stands, I'll need about 3 years to perfect the fairy ball spell," he explained. "However, if I can tap into additional time manipulation magic, say a T-I'm card from the Cardcaptor realm, or one of the chronomancy techniques I've discovered in the New World, I can shave that down to 1 or 2 years." A ripple of excitement ran through the hall. "That's incredible," someone called out. "Even if Natsu and the others aren't here, we'll still uphold our guild's reputation," another added. Lucian raised his arm and, with a playful grin, shaped his fingers into the cat-paw gesture so beloved by fairy tale members. "Then, let the kingdom know who we are." Together, they formed the familiar sign and shouted in unison, "We are Fairy Tale." Their voices echoed off the guild's walls, reasserting the guild's unbreakable spirit. Energy crackled in the air as dozens of hopeful mages came forward to sign up. Lucian scanned the list, selecting a handful of promising recruits. Marcus, a stalwart figure adept at sand magic. Alzak and Biska, a sharpshooting couple whose gun magic was precise and deadly. Lucky, a cheerful young man with a talent for wood sculpting spellcraft. Lucian nodded in satisfaction. "Welcome to Fairy Tale," he said with a broad smile. "Together, we'll forge a future even brighter than our past." A week later, Lucian found himself standing at the guild's grand entrance, watching as sunlight danced across the crest of the guild hall. Inside, the new recruits were already putting their abilities to the test, eager to prove themselves worthy of the Fairy Tale name and to support Lucian as he raced against time itself. Macau eyed the dozen or so guild members, all geared up for battle, then scratched his head and approached Lucian with a worried frown. "Lucian," he said, "it doesn't feel right for everyone to leave at once. Shouldn't we keep a few people behind to guard the guild? What if something goes wrong while we're gone?" The Fairy Tale Guild Hall wasn't a simple brick-and-mortar building. It was the legendary moving castle once owned by Phantom, priceless and uniquely magical. Macau's concern was understandable. If they emptied the place completely, someone might try to seize it in their absence. Lucian offered a reassuring smile. "I understand your worry, but from this point on, you don't need to call me president. It's too risky. And don't worry about the guild hall. I have a plan." Macau raised an eyebrow. "A plan?" Lucian nodded. "We're not just heading off to fight. I intend to bring the entire guild hall with us. No one will be able to steal it if it's on the move." Macau considered this for a moment. Leaving behind a handful of wizards would hardly deter a determined thief, and they'd be woefully outmatched if the castle itself were under threat. But the idea of relocating the fortress made sense. After all, it wasn't just the castle's value that was at stake. Hidden in its basement was an ancient grimoire, and deep within its vault lay the sealed meteor's radiance. Those priceless artifacts couldn't be left unprotected. He nodded slowly. "All right, if you say we're moving the guild hall, I trust you." Lucian's eyes glinted with quiet confidence. "Then we're all set. Let's get ready to depart." Lucian's plan was simple. He would carry the entire Fairy Tale Guild Hall, foundations, underground chambers, everything, with him, so he never had to worry about leaving it unguarded. "You're actually going to take the guild with you?" Macau's voice cracked in disbelief, and the rest of the wizards fell silent. Transport Fairy Tale straight up to the kingdom's capital? Even if it cleared the city walls, the royal gates would never admit a full-sized guild hall. Lucian merely shrugged. "Exactly. I'll tuck it away and set it back down when I return." With that, he produced a small, unassuming box from his pocket dimension and laid it on the ground. "Everyone, stand back," he instructed. Then, in a barely audible tone, Lucian began the ancient incantation of the mountain-moving spell. The earth trembled as the guild hall, walls, roof, and foundations, rose as if uprooted by a giant hand. Simultaneously, Lucian's traceless extension magic stretched at the box's interior, drawing the building in as though it were no more than a toy. At his skill level, that suitcase-sized space could expand to hold an entire city. Shrinking Fairy Tale down to pocket size? Child's play. "President, you're worthy of it." A roar of agreement swept through the guild hall, as everyone recalled the day Lucian had literally moved an entire mountain into the lake to forge a new island headquarters for the Fairy Tale Mage Association. They remembered how time and again he'd led them to victory, restoring their confidence with every battle. This year they hadn't been content with a middling finish. With Lucian at the helm, they believed they could claim the crown of the kingdom's strongest wizard guild. By the time Natsu and the others returned, the announcement was already echoing through the streets. Fairy Tale had won first place in the Grand Mage martial arts competition. Thanks to Lucian's leadership and the guild's unwavering effort, they were now officially the mightiest wizards in all the land. The thought of their rivals' envy brought grins to every face. "All right," Lucian said, stepping forward. "Next stop, Crocus, the flower capital." He flexed his fingers, calling forth the iron-rich sand buried beneath their feet. The particles whirled together into a massive, inky cloud that enveloped the guild members. With a gentle surge of magic, the sand-laden vortex lifted them skyward. Ahead lay Crocus, and whatever new challenges awaited the strongest guild in the kingdom. Chapter 58. The Game Begins. Third update. Lucian stared in awe as the black iron sand cloud carried him and his guildmates toward the city gates. "Is this really the City of Flowers?" he murmured. It looked vast, far larger than Magnolia City. Stretching before them in the easternmost reaches of the kingdom was Crocus, the realm's most prosperous metropolis, famous for its dazzling lantern palace of Maluclias, a sweeping golden palace at the city's heart. They descended at the main gate, not at the royal palace itself. By Grand Mage tournament rules, all competing guilds must first register at the city entrance so that the royal family can assign lodgings. Lucian followed Macau, the guild leader, through the formalities, bowing before the gate wardens, signing their names on the scroll, and presenting their letters of introduction. Within moments, the guards stamped their parchments and waved them through. Beyond the gates, Crocus lived up to its floral nickname. Blossoms of every hue, rosy pinks, sunny yellows, deep violets, lined the streets, clustered on doorways, draped over rooftops, and spilled from window boxes. Winding avenues threaded through groves of flowering trees whose petals drifted lazily in the breeze. Aromas of jasmine and citrus mingled as street vendors sold exotic perfumes distilled from local blooms. Lucian inhaled deeply. "It's like walking through a living garden," he said, glancing at his friends. Each of them wore wide smiles, evidently as captivated as he was. They gathered their belongings and prepared to set off for the Lantern Palace. The grand tournament was about to begin, and in a city as legendary as Crocus, anything could happen. Head-turning floral headpieces adorned nearly every passerby, each reflecting a different blossom's delicate beauty. Street performers drifted through the crowded avenues, wielding plant magic to conjure blooms that floated overhead like living confetti. With the Grand Magic Martial Arts Tournament in full swing, the city vibrated with excitement, far beyond the turnout at Magnolia City's Harvest Festival. Travelers arrived from neighboring towns and distant kingdoms, and on every street corner you could sense the presence of powerful mages, their auras crackling in anticipation of the competition. Only the 5 official participants were lodged in the tournament's designated hotel, Everyone else had to secure rooms at nearby inns on their own dime. But for Fairy Tale, that was no obstacle. Lucian simply flexed his feline claws and brokered the finest accommodations in town for every guild wizard. Since his arrival, the once struggling guild has steadily rebuilt its reputation and resources, though commissions have thinned in the wake of Fairy Tale's recent setbacks, and even some veterans hesitate before accepting new jobs. The guild's foundation remains as strong as ever, and its spirit refuses to wilt. The evening of check-in passed without a hitch. Although Fairy Tale's name carried weight throughout the kingdom, few recognized the individual wizards representing it here. Everyone knew about Makarov of the 10 Wizard Saints, Cover Girl Mirajane, the Fairy Queen Urza, and Fire Dragon Natsu, but they were all still on Tenru Island. Lucian himself seldom left the guild to accept jobs. Once his teammates finished their assignments, he'd teleport in to take care of the cleanup. He'd earned a modest reputation during the Harvest Festival, but his feline form and quiet manner meant ordinary folks rarely made the connection, since no one had announced, "Hey, that's Fairy Tale." The other guilds assumed this team of 4, plus a cat, belonged to some small, unremarkable lodge. After all, over 100 guilds had registered for the competition, many of them newly founded in the last few years and desperate to prove their worth. Early the next morning, Lucian and the other contestants from the major guilds gathered in the hotel's guest quarters. Word had spread quickly. The kingdom was hosting a grand magic martial arts competition, and in recent days, even small groups of independent magicians had hurriedly formed temporary guilds just to register. At dawn, royal envoys appeared to lead the competitors to the first venue. "Please follow us," a courteous attendant said, her voice echoing off the stone walls. They climbed into reinforced carriages and set out toward the east side of the city. In the distance rose a vast circular arena that looked uncannily like the old Roman Colosseum, only grander. As they drew nearer, the attendant pointed out the structure. "This is Domus Frau," she explained. "Our king commissioned it at great expense for this very tournament." Massive stone giants, each clutching a sword the size of a greatsword, flanked the arena's entrance. Along the outer walls, reliefs depicted fearsome beasts and legendary battles. One of the magicians, an eager young woman with bright green eyes, raised her voice above the others. "What's the first event going to be?" "A free-for-all brawl in the arena." The assembled contestants turned to listen. The attendant shook her head with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry," she admitted. "I don't have that information either." Lucian exchanged glances with the other mages, excitement and nerves flickering in their eyes. The gates of Domus Frau loomed ahead, but no one yet knew what awaited them inside. The exact nature of today's challenges will only be revealed once we reach the arena, the herald announced. Lucky tugged at her red bow, scanning the crowd of rival guilds as waves of magic washed over her. "Everyone else looks so powerful. Are we really up to this?" Marcus, ever the chatterbox, flashed her an encouraging grin. "Don't worry, we're no pushovers, and besides, we've got our president on point." Biska and Alzak exchanged worried looks. Biska leaned in, voice low. "Lucian said not to call him president here. Macau holds that title officially. If the royal family spots us calling Lucian president, they'll suspect we're scheming." Alzak nodded in agreement. "Let's stick to the story." They bowed their heads in unison, then turned to regard Lucian, who appeared to be asleep with his head gently resting on Lucky's shoulder. In truth, he wasn't sleeping. He was consolidating a breakthrough in his fairy orb research from last night. In this competition, the fate of their guild rested entirely on his shoulders. The rest of them were simply there to fill out the ranks and support him in any way they could. Lucian had nothing urgent to attend to before the official competition, and he deliberately held back a portion of his mental energy, just in case. Guided by the usher, he and the other contestants stepped into the cavernous arena, instantly met by a thunderous roar. The stands were already filled to capacity. Each time a group of wizards entered, the audience rose to its feet, chanting and cheering for their favorites. In this world, celebrated mages are as adored as pop idols here on Earth. Figures like Mirajane, who appear on every magazine cover, wield influence over ordinary people comparable to that of top-charting singers. Even Natsu had suffered imitators, declaring themselves the Fire Dragon, duping countless gullible girls in towns far and wide. Lucy herself, when she first dreamed of joining Fairy Tail, nearly fell victim to one of those scams. "There are so many people here," Lucian breathed, blinking as he climbed down from Lucky's shoulders. The sheer scale of the audience sent a thrill of excitement through him. This was it. The real competition was about to begin. Lucian glanced toward the stands and spotted Macau leading their guild in the third row. They were doing their best to cheer on the four contenders and their feline companion, but their voices were quickly drowned out by the larger crowd. The loudest roars came instead for Jura Regis, one of the Holy 10 mages representing the Snake Princess Scale Guild. The trio of striking wizards, Hibiki, Leon, and Ivan, from the Blue Pegasus Guild, and Jenny Liolette, recently ranked second in Magic Weekly's Ideal Magician Girlfriend poll. Chapter 359, The Mechanical Magic Monster, Part 1. "Good morning, everyone," boomed the enchanted microphone, carrying Abba's voice crisply to every corner of the vast arena. "I'm Abba, and it's my honor to welcome you to the inaugural Grand Magic Martial Arts Tournament. On behalf of the Kingdom, I extend a warm greeting to all our competitors and spectators." With that, the grand opening ceremony was officially underway. Abba raised his hand to signal the next announcement. "First, let me introduce our distinguished guests. Please welcome Mr. Yajima, former member of the Magic Council, now pursuing a career as a Master Chef, and Mr. Lahar, captain of the 4th Supervision Unit of the Magic Council and commander of the Rune Knights." A round of applause echoed through the hall as Yajima, clad in a simple chef's jacket, and Lahar, in the crisp uniform of the Magic Council with his signature spectacles, stepped onto the stage. They bowed to the audience, smiled broadly, waved, and then returned to their seats. Abba continued, "This year's tournament features 101 teams, each representing one of the kingdom's wizard guilds. Allow me to name them all. Snake Princess Scale, Blue Pegasus, Mermaid's Heel, Four-Headed Hound, Sword-Biting Tiger, Snake Demon Fin, Giant Nose, Headless Knight's Helm, Earth Spirit Wheel, Poison Demon Fang, and 91 more." As Abba spoke, the crowd settled into an expectant hush. The guild banners fluttered overhead, each bearing a unique sigil. Magic crackled faintly in the air, promising feats of power and skill beyond imagination. Ahead lay the trials that would test every competitor's resolve and reveal who among them truly deserved the title of Grand Champion. When the announcer began calling out the guilds, the crowd erupted for the big names. Snake Princess Scale and Blue Pegasus, once Fairy Tail's fiercest rivals, drew thunderous cheers. Lesser-known houses like the Headless Knight and Earth Spirit Wheel earned polite applause. Then came the hush of expectation as Fairy Tail rang out. Every eye swung toward Lucian, his four companions, and the lone cat at their feet. Even nearby competitors turned to stare. A wave of murmurs rolled through the hall. Weren't the core members of Fairy Tail lost at sea, never to be found? "I heard they all drowned. Isn't the entire guild presumed dead? And who are these wizards standing under the Fairy Tail banner? I don't recognize any of them." Fairy Tail was famed as the kingdom's greatest wizard guild. Its exploits made headlines across the land. So when rumors said the guild had vanished, everyone believed it. Now, here they were again, and no one knew quite what to make of it. A few months ago, news of Fairy Tail's core members vanishing on Tenru Island broke across the kingdom and sent shockwaves through every corner of the magical world. When the Grand Magic Festival opened today, neither the audience nor the rival guilds expected Fairy Tail to appear. After all, only humiliation could await a guild already presumed defeated. It would have been wiser for them to bow out quietly and preserve whatever dignity remained. Yet here they stood. Lucian strode into the arena, flanked by his four faithful comrades and a single cat, determined to prove that Fairy Tail had not been broken. Around them, wizards from dozens of guilds cast sly, malicious glances. Some bore long-standing grudges. Others craved the spotlight that would come from toppling the once unstoppable guild. While these rivals had once struggled to match Fairy Tail's might, they now sensed weakness and saw a chance to feast on the fallen. In their eyes, this was an invitation, and they intended to pounce. Nearby, Blue Pegasus and Snake Princess Scales, both on friendly terms with Fairy Tail, waved warmly at Lucian and his teammates. A handful of die-hard fairy tale fans in the stands, realizing Lucian's squad stood for their beloved guild, erupted into cheers, though their voices were quickly swallowed by the roar of the crowd. Once all 101 participating guilds had signed in, the host cleared his throat, took a sip of water, and announced, "Now, please welcome our mascot, Mr. Pumpkin, to explain the tournament rules." At his cue, a diminutive figure sporting a pumpkin-shaped hat bounded onto the stage in front of the assembled teams. His magical projection soared high above the arena so that every spectator could see him. He raised one gloved hand and boomed, "Welcome to the Grand Magic Martial Arts Tournament. Over the next 4 days, we will hold 4 matches, 1 per day. Today, we begin with the preliminaries. Only those teams victorious in this opening round will advance to the official competition. Good luck to you all." The official competition is divided into 3 categories: individual, team, and free-for-all, and all rankings are determined by accumulated points. The team that finishes with the highest point total will claim the prestigious guild trophy and receive a 30 million yuan bonus from the kingdom. The Pumpkin Man paused, surveying the crowd before he continued. Today, we begin with the preliminaries. The rules are simple. We will release magical beasts engineered by the kingdom's Magic Development Bureau. These creatures are extraordinarily powerful. Even S-rank mages will struggle to overcome them. In the preliminaries, each team must send 5 members to face one of these beasts. If you defeat it, you advance to the official competition. Fail, and you're eliminated. Magic beasts? Came murmurs from both the competing wizards and the spectators. To clarify, the Pumpkin Man swept his arm in a grand gesture. Instantly, a magical projection flickered to life above the arena. There, towering over the participants, stood a colossal mechanical gorilla, its gleaming metal joints and pulsating arcane cores testifying to its fearsome strength. Everyone stared, apprehension and excitement rippling through the crowd. The preliminaries were about to begin. Lucian couldn't tear his eyes away from the image beamed across the arena's giant screen. In it, a colossal mechanical gorilla charged forward at inhuman speed, obliterating the house in its path. Without missing a beat, it launched itself dozens of meters through the air, landing with such force that the earth split beneath it. As arcane runes flickered to life across its metal frame, the beast threw back its massive head and unleashed a torrent of blistering flame. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, and even the seasoned wizards in attendance broke out in cold sweat. 4 of them, Alzaka, Biska, Marcus, and Lucky, belonged to Fairy Tale, and they exchanged grim looks. Not even their combined might would be enough to fell that towering monstrosity. Alzaka and Biska's twin rifles and sniper guns could strike fast and from afar, but against a 10-meter-tall, armor-plated gorilla, every shot would barely leave a mark. Marcus's sand magic might scratch its surface at best. Lucky's wood modeling spells, versatile though they were, simply lacked the raw destructive power required. They all knew, without speaking it, that this mechanical magic gorilla was in a league of its own, and facing it head-on would be nothing short of suicide. Their teamwork wasn't bad, for a ragtag quartet facing off against some wizards borrowed from rival guilds. But when the hulking mechanical magic gorilla lumbered into view, its super-dense plating made the group's attacks glance off like raindrops. Everyone froze. "Relax," Lucian called from Lucky's shoulder, casually waving one paw. "It's all just for show." He sounded bored. In Lucian's eyes, the metal behemoth looked fearsome only at first glance. Beneath its intimidating exterior lay the heart of a mid-rank golem, no match at all for a genuine S-class mage. Even those self-styled S-class operators cropping up outside Fairy Tale would dismantle it without breaking a sweat. And as far as Lucian was concerned, it wasn't a threat to him in the slightest. Chapter 360, Showcasing Their Unique Abilities, Second Update. "Listen up, everyone," the announcer's voice thundered across the arena. "We have 101 teams today. We'll divide you into 10 groups, 9 groups of 10 teams, and 1 group of 11. When your guild's name is called, send your representatives to the center. All others, please remain in place." He pulled a scroll of parchment from his pocket and began reading off names. Group 1. Crocodile Skin, Werewolf Claws, Boar Fangs, Silver Phoenix, Radiant Dawn, Iron Lotus, Azure Fang, Crimson Shield, Amber Wolf, and Golden Sun. At the sound of their guilds, 50 contestants, 5 from each, marched to the center of the arena. Almost immediately, 10 colossal magic circles shimmered to life across the way. Within each circle, the air crackled with arcane energy, and with an earth-shaking roar, a massive mechanical magic gorilla coalesced into view. Gears ground, pistons hissed, and glowing runes glimmered along its metal hide. A collective gulp rose from the onlookers. The gorillas thumped their metallic chests, sending ripples through the stone floor. Then, in perfect synchrony, a second set of glyphs illuminated the circles, and heavy cages of cast steel slid into place around the beasts, sealing them inside with resounding clanks. The first group was now ready. Let the trials begin. Above the arena, 10 glowing projections materialized in midair, each displaying the interior of one of the steel chambers. A hush fell over the crowd before the host's voice thundered from every speaker. First-round teams, please choose a chamber and enter. If you cannot defeat the magic beast inside, you may exit at any time or forfeit your match by shouting, "I give up." Should you press on and suffer fatal consequences, the organizers will not be held responsible. Cheers and nervous laughter rippled through the stands as each of the 10 teams hurried toward the nearest chamber. One by one, they stepped across the threshold, and the doors slammed shut behind them. The towering figure in the pumpkin mask nodded to the host, who raised his enchanted microphone high. The first Grand Magic Martial Arts preliminary competition is now officially underway. No sooner had he spoken than each chamber erupted in chaos. Mechanical magic gorillas sprang from shadowy alcoves, eyes blazing with enchanted energy, and charged the intruding magicians. The competitors whirled into battle stances, unleashing dazzling spells of fire, ice, and lightning to parry and retaliate. Explosions of color and crackling light filled the rooms, each one more spectacular than the last. Even Lucian, who had memorized every incantation in the famed fairy tale archives, found himself breathless. He had studied countless spells, but never before witnessed such a breathtaking display of magical variety and raw power. Lucian studied the bizarre display of spells before him, magic that could twist musical notes and hurl shattering sound waves, silken threads that bound like living spider silk, viscous mucus spat from demonic mouths, even tongues that lashed out like supple whips. After only a moment's scrutiny, he already understood the underlying principles well enough to replicate each one. Still, the sheer diversity of magic left him in awe. This world truly ran on arcane power, and its practitioners never ceased inventing new applications. As for the mechanical magic gorilla looming at the arena's center, Lucian felt no fear. To most wizards, however, it was a terrifying foe. In the first round's 10 competing teams, only one had eked out a narrow victory against the automaton. The other 9 either threw down their wands in surrender or were felled, 5 at a time, unconscious. Clearly, these metal beasts were controlled by hidden magicians. They weren't designed to kill the contestants, only to test their skill and nerve. "Don't worry," the so-called Pumpkin Man had growled, his threatening words loud enough to stir the crowd's excitement. "These gorillas bite, but they won't draw blood." The roar of the crowd had scarcely died down when the announcer's voice rang out again. Next up, Blue Pegasus, Black Cheetah, and Crazy Lion's Mane. Compared to the first batch of teams, these 3 squads looked far more formidable, and Blue Pegasus in particular turned every head. Of their 5 members, neither leader Yi nor their popular star Jenny so much as lifted a finger. Instead, the team's 3 other wizards, each more striking than the last, stepped forward and, working in perfect harmony, dismantled the mechanical magic gorilla in under 2 minutes. There was nothing showy or gratuitous in their performance. It was a calculated decision to keep Yi and Jenny on reserve, preserving the true might of their squad for the later rounds. In mage duels, when opponents are of comparable power, raw strength can only carry you so far. It's the duelists who know their enemies inside out and who can devise a flawless counter-strategy who turn the tide in an instant. Blue Pegasus had just demonstrated exactly that kind of tactical brilliance. The inaugural Grand Magic Martial Arts Tournament was nothing short of spectacular, brimming with masters from every corner of the realm, including the elusive Holy 10, who wisely held back their true power until the official rounds. Blue Pegasus wasn't the only guild playing it safe. Other top teams did the same. Take Snake Princess Scale, for example. They dispatched only their puppet mage, Shirley Brandy. For 30 relentless minutes, Shirley pummeled her opponent, the mechanical magician gorilla, by repeatedly summoning stone titans and living tree giants. Victory came only when the gorilla's magic crystal was completely drained. All the while, her 4 teammates looked on without uttering a single spell. From dawn till dusk, guild after guild marched into the arena, unleashing breathtaking displays of magic that sent the crowd into a continuous uproar. Scenes like these were a rare treat for ordinary spectators. Now, please welcome the 9th team, Fairy Tail. The moment the announcer called their name, the audience shifted its gaze to the 4 wizards and their small, pink-scaled companion stepping confidently into the arena. Some in the crowd were waiting for Fairy Tail to make a fool of itself. Others watched out of simple curiosity. Only a small handful of die-hard fans quietly hoped their favorite guild might still pull through, even without its core leadership. These long-remembered supporters had been at the Harvest Festival a few months back, cheering on the first wizard competition. They knew that even if the other 4 competitors were untested, Lucky, the winged cat who once defeated Laxus, was undeniably an S-class wizard. "It's our turn." Lucian spread his wings and leapt from Lucky's shoulder, leading 4 tense guildmates toward the nearest pavilion. The crowd shifted, all eyes drawn to these 5 figures from Fairy Tail. The event's host, sensing the moment, turned to his 2 special guests. "Everyone here knows that Fairy Tail was once the kingdom's mightiest guild," he announced, voice booming across the plaza. "But after the Tenro Island disaster, their master and many top members vanished without a trace. Do you think this new team even stands a chance in the preliminaries?" Before either guest could reply, one spoke with a knowing smile. "Perhaps you're unaware. No, not all of Fairy Tail's heavy hitters disappeared on Tenro Island. I don't think they'll take first place this time," Ajima said, his voice firm as he straightened his chef's hat. "But I'm certain they'll breeze through the preliminaries." A former Fairy Tail wizard himself, Ajima had rushed back to the guild the moment news of the Tenru Island incident reached him. Though his brief visit had only brought him face-to-face with Macao, Ajima was well aware that Lucian was holed up in the workshop, fully absorbed in cracking the secrets of the fairy ball, determined to free Makarov and the others still trapped inside.